I'm going to call the meeting back to order. We have quorum. So we will now begin on the next division, which is long-term care, homes and services. So I'm going to ask for questions.
You know what, if I could, Councillor McKelvey had expressed an interest in asking questions of that particular division.
Oh, did she? Okay.
If we could, she was just enthusiastic about asking questions. So if we could just hold it down, perhaps do a couple more divisions and then go back. I don't know what her questions are or if she actually has them, but she seemed pretty keen on asking questions on that division.
Why don't we tackle parks, forestry and recreation, and then we'll go back. How's that? That should be done in time. So parks, forestry and recreation, questions? Okay, it's all yours, Councillor Carroll.
I'm pretty sure there'll be some non-members out there who want to ask questions about parks, forestry, and recreation if their TVs are on. But I will start. Well, we started talking about the inflation and cost recovery combination that leads us to 4.07%. That is just across user fees. We also are looking at some interesting numbers in how the user fee increases that we've been doing every year are affecting subscription in some of the programs. The numbers on users and programs, I can't really find where, if we've introduced 20,000 extra spaces, where are they going? Is it across the board, or are we focused on particular areas? Leisure versus instruction?
So through the chair, there's a number of different things going on. Should I tackle user fees first and then?
Well, that's my point. There are a number of things going on that all really impact on each other. We've been raising user fees. We've been looking at longer wait lists, but there are some programs where things are dropping. So where are the new spaces going?
I'll start with user fees, just as it relates to what you see in the budget right now. So as noted before, there is a 2.18 corporate user fee inflation rate.
Yeah.
And as noted, and Mr. Vita can join in if need be, there's then an analysis of what we call basket of goods, which in each division looks at the inflationary rates that are in that division. So as an example with PF&R, when we started with the 2.18, we then looked at additional influences, inflationary influences on the division. So a number of things came up that were much higher than the 2.18, which are then blended into the inflationary rate. So we looked at our salaries going up 1.89%. We had a minimum wage increase of 2.5% as a result of the new legislation that was implemented in that first year of implementation, which had a fairly substantial impact. And we were also looking at gas, hydro, and some of our interdivisional charges. Gas being 5%, hydro being 8.6%, and our divisional charges being anywhere from 5 to 8%. So these things are all put together in this basket of goods, and then there's a proportionate percentage that comes out that gives us our inflationary rate for the year. So as a result of these things, our inflationary rate is at 3.07%.
Right.
We then do a comparator with other municipalities around how our fees fit within some of those structures in the areas that we do fees, and everywhere look at where we are either too expensive or not expensive enough in relation to a similar kind of service in other municipalities. And in many areas, we found that our fees, where we have user fees, are substantially lower. Mm-hmm. And we usually go in the GTA, we'll go Mississauga, Ajax, some few municipalities in York Region to get sort of an idea of where people are at. So that was where the additional 1% came in. When it comes to the actual number of spaces, there is some fluidity in the number of spaces based on the age group and other factors. So with the growth plan that was accelerated by Council last year, which added 20,000 spaces in, but just to programs that were over-enrolled. So as an example, we added the 20,000 spaces, but really as a direct approach to trying to relieve programs that had substantial wait lists. So those program registrations, the total number of programs went up, and I have breakdown of which programs and where and that piece of it. But other things that fluctuate on the total amount of space in programs every year are things like facility closures as a result of rehabilitation projects. We had a major community center that was closed last year and for a part of the year before. We've had fluctuations in our registration in, as an example, preschool programs where the legislation has changed and we now cannot offer programs for anyone less than 4 without a caregiver present. So these are the types of things overall that change the participation rates. But in all, the 20,000 spaces that were funded last year went to the appropriate places so that we could expand those programs.
Right. And so largely what they did in that first year was address waiting list types of programs. Do people who are applying to go to those programs on the welcome policy, do they join the waiting list in the queue in the same way?
So through the chair, the registration process is fluid, and it's not determined by whether you're on the waiting list or whether you're on the welcome policy or whether the center is a free center or a paid center. You go in through the same process. So welcome policy, as an example, if you've qualified for welcome policy, pre-qualified for welcome policy, you'll have the welcome policy amount credited to your account, and then you enter the regular registration process just like anyone else. So there's no difference in as an example, how many welcome policy participants were brought in from the wait list.
Right, but they're on, if they applied to be on it, they go onto the waiting list the same way.
Correct.
Okay, so the only thing left,
One quick question.
Well, the only thing left about welcome policy then is it dropped by 600,000. So you're pulling that out and adding the grow spaces back in. But are you confident that that drop really is from free centers? Because if we're raising rates, and I understand the cost recovery program, but if we're raising rates, there's a certain percentage of welcome policy people who see camp fees are now so much that I don't even have enough in my account by summer camp, so I'm not using these funds.
Right. So through the chair, and this was actually directed by council several years ago around welcome policy rates. So the welcome policy entitlements automatically increase at the same rate as what the inflationary rate is for our fees and programs.
Oh, okay, so the envelope gets a lift as well.
Right.
Okay.
So the welcome policy entitlement for both children and youth would go up by the 4.707% this year, so that there isn't any loss of affordability for that group. That is which is most vulnerable.
Thank you, Councillor.
Right, okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have capital questions, but you'll do a second round. Yeah.
For the second.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Layton? We'll do the committee members, and we'll go to the second round. Councillor Layton?
Thank you very much. On the Ravines, you're proposing the elimination of litter pickup in Ravines, correct?
Through the chair, we're not proposing the elimination. That was an enhanced service request.
Yeah, we didn't do
not make it into the budget as a funded item.
That is not being, is that the same one that was the water course recommendation from several years ago? The recommendation to enhance our...
It's a combination of a number. There was a budget item, a budget recommendation from council for that item to be considered as part of this operating budget.
So you're not recommending the increase in service in this area. Why is that?
We are recommending a few enhanced service priorities based on the sort of priority implementation of those items. We just didn't have enough room to put the entire room in the budget this year. We'll look at it in future years.
And what other elements aren't being included in this budget that has been previously considered by council?
Hang on one second, I'll get you that list. Right, so there's litter picking in Ravines. There was an expansion of the Parks Ambassador program that was recommended through the Parks Plan, which has not been fully implemented, but has been partially implemented last year. There's a further implementation of the Swim to Survive program. That is not being recommended this year, and not being recommended because we've actually advanced the program into phase 4 of the program, and there isn't any surety that we'll be able to advance it any further this year, just based on the capacity for the school boards to pick it up. And then the last item is an interim maintenance item at Tommy Thompson Park, and that involves interim maintenance before the park is actually relayed to the city. It's still under the care and supervision of TRCA.
So the Swim to Survive is a program that we're unable to implement?
I'm going to ask Howie to answer. He has a better detailed knowledge of the program.
Through the chair. So phase 4, thank you. We have fully implemented and can sustain. Phase 5, which would get us up to the 18,000 or so participants, we can implement next year. We'll bring it back based on available funding. And also it gives us an opportunity to continue to build our partnership with TDSB because we do need them to bring the additional schools on board, which takes a bit of time. So we're comfortable with the phasing.
Okay, and the expansion of the Parks Ambassador Program, is that for lack of need, or have circumstances changed, or is this?
Through the chair, microphone is not. Just to bring people back to last year, we did expand the program partially last year, especially in relation to the downtown east side sort of response and the demand for the program. We have originally recommended many more positions. We've had some relief through the partial implementation last year. There still is some unmet demand around general park supervision from park ambassadors, but currently the additional resources are being used where they're most required.
In the forestry division, we're speeding up the timetable. It looks like they're speeding up quite considerably, but nothing's changing in the budget. It's predicting that wait times for service requests, which were 10 months in 2018, will become 3 months in 19. Is there an increase in the budget or staffing level?
So through the chair, the forestry budget remains at the same service level as it was in 2018. The increase to the wait times in 2018 was a direct result of the storm responses that we experienced in 2018.
So we're just going to assume that we kind of get ideal weather conditions?
We're catching up.
A budget for ideal weather conditions.
We're catching up to where we should be now. If there are further weather events, such as there were last year, certainly to the extent that there were last year, you will see an increase in the wait times around forestry response.
So we've got 4% of the budget, $20 million of the operating budget, pulling from reserves. Is that roughly the case?
So there are some, there's a list of different reserves. There's some forestry that pulls from reserves based on the forest management plan that was approved by council several years ago. We have in this budget pulled a little bit extra from reserves to ensure that the service level remains the same.
Why wouldn't we pull it from the tax-supported budget?
That was a measure that we thought we could afford within the reserves to give some relief to the tax-supported budget.
So we're pulling from reserves because of direction that was given to keep us at 0% increase.
We're pulling from reserves because we have the affordability within the reserves to support it.
How much are we contributing to the reserves, those same reserves in this budget?
The reserve contribution, well, there's two different reserves for forestry. So it's, there's the reserve that was from the environmental fund from several years ago, which is what we use around the operating budget and is depleting. I think there's around 5 million, where is he? 12 million left for future years. And there's also development reserve. So when, as an example, through development applications, there is some money that's contributed to the reserves from those applications that are then invested in planting strategies.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll ask some more questions about capital, I suspect.
Okay. Any other questions, committee members? Okay. Oh, Councillor Nunziata.
Just one question about community center. So now that the York Community Center, Recreation Center has been open for a little over a year, what is the wait time? I know that we,
I wouldn't have.
that we couldn't handle. There's a lot of people that we can.
I couldn't, through the chair, provide a specific wait. I can if we can dive into it and give you that offline, but I wouldn't have a specific number of waitlisted participants at the York.
Is it huge because it's no no fee? Like it's free programming?
It's great programming and it's a great facility in an area of the city that had a gap in facilities for many, many years. So I think it's a combination of all those things.
Both. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's look at the capital backlog, shall we? So I'm looking at page 26 of the analyst notes, and I note that currently the backlog as a percent of asset value is 15.1%, and over the course of our 10-year capital plan, it increases by $170 million odd to about 20.3%. So we're increasing the backlog by about a third from where it is now. Is that right? I got that roughly right?
Through the chair. You're talking over the 10-year plan, is that your question?
Over the 10-year.
Yes, that's correct.
That's
Yes.
correct, okay. And there are some of these that, I thank you, by the way, for breaking it down by asset class. Not many departments have done that, and that's very helpful. I noticed, for example, with trails, pathways, and bridges, we will actually have a backlog that is 98% of the asset value.
And through the chair, at the current funding levels, that is the case.
So that means we pretty much won't have any trails, pathways, or bridges that are in good repair 10 years from now.
So it's
Pretty much.
it's a fluid plan. I mean, if you look at it just statically that way, sure, I would say yes.
Well,
But it's a fluid plan, and
I
every
have this
year,
terrible reality where I vote yes or no on the plan this year, so I don't get to be fluid. So the plan that I will be voting on says that we will not have any trails, pathways, or bridges that are in good repair 10 years from now if we adhere to this plan.
through the chair, that is what the data says, yes.
But if I can, through the chair, add, to Daniel's point, there is some fluidity in the plan, and quite often,
I don't want to do who's on first with you
Fair
right now. In terms of the parks plan, the facility master plan on page 45. It lists here a number of facilities that are being done under that. That's great. Does the 10-year plan deliver the money we need to stay on track with the facilities master plan?
through the chair, the 10-year plan moving forward does deliver on many of the items that have been identified in the facilities master plan. It does not deliver on an increase to the state of good repair funding, which was recommended in that plan.
But all the new facilities that were imagined and
That's
expansion.
correct.
so
Keeping
it's-
in mind that there are some facilities that are based on reserve contributions from development growth, as an example, and are projected on those contributions coming in. Based on our 10-year scan, what you see here is what we believe can be accomplished within that 10 years.
I know that, but that's not the question I'm asking. I'm asking, does the budget that you are putting in front of us, the 10-year capital plan that you are putting in front of us, allow you to deliver on the council-approved facilities master plan on the timetable in that plan?
So through the chair, for the first 10 years of the plan, yes, it does.
Except for the state of good repair.
Except for the state of good repair, and the facilities master plan is a 20-year plan.
Right, okay. Are we keeping up with the parks plan? Does this budget meet the goals that we expected to meet in this year in the parks plan?
So the parks plan is effectively over in last year.
Okay.
There were some areas of the parks plan, and we did report out on this at Parks and Environment last year, I believe, that we were very successful in accomplishing. The most important one to note would be an increase in the small sort of C capital repairs in parks. And that resulted in things like a large bench replacement program, large picnic table replacement program, and some other additional rehab components.
Are there pieces left outstanding as well?
There are pieces left outstanding.
Could you quickly enumerate those for me?
The ones outstanding would be, as noted here, the Parks Ambassadors Program, and the expansion of that was not achieved to the extent of the Parks Plan. There were also increases in our horticulture resources that were recommended in the plan that were not achieved over the 5 years of the plan. And there was also recommendations around an increase in overall maintenance, including ravine maintenance.
And the tree canopy goals that we set after the ice storm, are we tracking to achieve those
Through the
levels of
chair,
forest cover?
we are going to be reporting on an update on the forest management plan in a few months. We're currently conducting a canopy review through the usual process.
Yes.
We believe that we're tracking in the right direction. All of the data is not in conclusively yet, but we also need to do an evaluation of, to your question previously, the amounts left in the reserve, what's left in the plan, and what the financial viability of achieving the plan is over that period.
So we don't know if we're achieving the targets set by council.
We will be reporting out on that.
I know, but I have to vote on the budget before then.
Thank you, Councillor. I think she's answered the question as best she can. Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, I had a couple of questions. One is, what's the average time for something to be approved? Let's say it's a park revitalization, once it's sent into purchasing?
And through the chair, if it's a tender, it's
Yep.
approximately 6 months. And that is
6 months
from when purchasing receives it until a contract is executed.
And have you found ever that it's been longer than 6 months?
On occasion, there's always some factors that come into a procurement process. So on occasion, it is longer than 6 months, and on very few cases, it's less than 6 months.
So is that an acceptable standard for the division?
If I may, through the chair, of course, to be able to deliver the capital budget in the time frame that we would like it to happen, then sure, we would prefer that period of time to be shorter.
Partly, could I suggest that you can only build in certain parts of the year? So if it gets stuck somehow, then you've missed a year of construction, am I right?
That is correct. That's one of the reasons that we're endeavoring to make sure that our project timeline and our project planning is improved as we go along.
Okay, now the next one happens to be about the school board and our relationships there. I understand that all the leases are coming up. Are all the pool leases coming up this year?
So through the chair, the shared and exclusive use agreement has been, as you likely know, in overhold for several years. And that lease came up, I believe, 8 or 9 years ago. And we've been in ongoing negotiations with the TDSB around renewing it. We are just beginning a process around renegotiating the pool agreement. We had extended it for 2 years on mutual agreement with the TDSB, and now we're getting to a period where we need to renew it and formalize the next stage of the partnership.
Is all of that in this budget?
No, there's not anything in this budget. That will be for next year's budget.
For next year?
Yeah.
So it's just whatever the standard is here?
That's
whatever the overhold amount
Yeah,
is?
nothing changing with any of the school board relationships in this.
Nothing, except they've now decided that everything after 6 requires a permit from 6 to 9. Would we be on a lease most of those times?
It honestly, through the chair, it
It's
depends
hard for
which
me to
school.
hear, Janice.
It depends which school it is. So I'm not, are you referencing our ability to access the schools or external groups' abilities to access?
That everybody would have to permit from 6 to 9, there'd be no leases anymore. I'm wondering if that is something to run into.
If the requirement was for us, we would be managing it through the existing relationship framework that we have with the TDSB. I'm going to ask Mr. Dayton to comment if he's heard anything. I haven't personally heard anything on that.
Beyond the permits that we currently get for spaces outside of our exclusive use spaces, we're continuing to receive those spaces in the same way. We haven't been told anything different.
So you have exclusive use, and that goes to whatever time for the community centers that are within the schools or overseeing the pool leases. And no one's written to say, sorry, there's a permit only from 6 to 9.
So our exclusive use space agreement gives us exclusive use to certain spaces. Above that, we have to generally permit the spaces that we require in some schools. There are some schools that have a more unique situation, but in most cases, if we need classrooms, gymnasiums, they currently are permitted. As some space within the schools are exclusive use. So we would continue to permit those spaces, and we have to get the consent of the principal.
But generally, there is a lease with the school board that covers space for gyms, for pools, for where our community centers are situated. That's on a lease which is in overhold, generally.
That's correct. There's 2 separate agreements. There is the lease that you're referring to, and what Howie is referring to is the shared exclusive use agreement, and that's for space where we have some exclusive use and then some permitted use. And then there's a separate agreement around the use of pools, TDSB pools.
And is that till 9 o'clock or till 6 o'clock when you have exclusive use?
The pool agreement starts at 6 p.m. in the
I'm
after-school
talking
hours.
about the others, the community centers.
It's different. It really, the schedule changes with each school. There isn't a standard, process around that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Council. Any other questions with councilors? Councilor Carroll?
I have some capital questions, but I'll just go to the smallest item in the operating budget that is not funded. The pilot, we expect when we do deputations that there will be people here who live around the Pam McConnell Aquatic Center but can't get in it. So we have the pilot that was proposed that makes sure that Regent Park kids are actually gaining access to not just swim programs, but leadership swim programs, possible job opportunities resulting, and it would cost $15,000 and a 0.38 of a person to start that pilot this year, and that is not funded?
Correct. Through the chair, that's just for the planning piece that we would need to get it going in the fall, and then 2020 would when we actually start to realize the program if funding is approved.
The notes indicate that you really have fleshed it out, though. You're through some of to finish the planning is definitely doable, and this could start in the fall.
Through the chair, I think we have identified an estimate around what it would cost to implement such a program. We still have work to do with the user group that has been very involved in this, in coming up with the actual outline of the program. But we have estimated, as an example, how many hours of pool time and what those lifeguards costs and instructor costs might be. The actual program still needs to be developed to a certain extent.
I have some other questions, so I'm just going to wrap it up in one thing. This is over 3 years. It's still only $160,000. And if this pilot succeeds and informs you something, are there other aquatic facilities in the city, either now or being built as a result of development dollars, where having this kind of approach in place will be used again if we proceed with this and it succeeds in making sure that low-income kids have access to the opportunities that come out of swimming competencies? We could use it elsewhere in the city, could we not?
Through the chair, certainly if it's a pilot that is deemed to be successful, it is something that we could use throughout the city. But I would also note that the income assistance programs that we have, the number of free programs that we have, and the free community centers that we have also go a long way towards allowing children in low-income families and neighborhoods to participate in those programs without any fees. So I believe we have a certain system in place already, and this program may augment it to a certain place. But I believe our existing program delivers that program to a higher level of equity.
Okay, and a significant cost. If we flip all the way to page 42, the big IT programs that are going to help you manage not only registrations and wait lists, but also your HR function, big IT, big up for the PF in our region. We really asked for a business case. How do we know? How do we know that what the not only what the pure costs of this are going to be once it's done? What's the cost to run it? And in positions and dollars, and what do we get out of it? What are the benefits of it? And the note in there tells us that we just still don't know. Is that the case? Or could we get that this year? Because we're going to have to vote to do it without knowing what we get out of it, which we have done before and not been happy.
So through the chair, we are working on developing more clear estimates around what those benefits and cost savings may be. Noting that in some cases, we're either implementing a new system that was never there before, so we don't have a real good idea of what those cost savings may be. So as an example, Enterprise Work Management, which is a citywide work management program, our Parks branch has never had a work management program. So part of going through the development of that program is being able to identify what some of those savings may be. The registration replacement program, again, this is a program that already exists. We're replacing it with a better program that is more customer focused and will have a better customer benefit, likely than a cost savings benefit. So there are a number of different benefits that we'll be working into that more detailed report.
So is that code for saying it's going to cost more? but we think you'll get a benefit?
Through the chair, there are operating impacts of capital that add, but hopefully there are also efficiency savings that at a minimum will make it cost neutral over time.
Okay, okay. I have some more questions, but I don't think you have time for them.
Any other questions?
If anyone else wants to ask questions about the ferry program, I'll learn from that.
I have just a quick couple questions. With regard to your capital spend rate, including state of good repair, where are you at, and where have you been at over the last couple of years?
So through the chair, I'm going to ask Daniel to fill in the details, but we have increased our spend rate quite substantially over the last 3 years, mostly as a result of being able to add additional capital-funded staff to advance those projects.
And where would it be now?
It's at approximately 75% now.
75%? Okay, so again, when we're budgeting, give you X amount for your capital spend, you're doing only 75% of it, and you just carry forward every year? Why would it only be, I know it's been increasing, but what would be the major contributing factors to
So
not
through
being
the
able to
chair,
spend?
there's a number of contributing factors. As an example, our spend rate on our state of good repair, our debt-funded projects, is substantially higher because of the rate that those projects can go forward with. Things that may impact the spend rate would be our ability to acquire land in a given year. As an example, if we've budgeted a land acquisition and that negotiation carries over to the next year, all of those funds, although approved in the budget, would be carried over for another year. If we're building a large project, as an example, and there are issues around the land and mediation of the land, that may slow the project down, and those funds would be carried over to the next year. So wherever we can, we're spending it as quickly as we can and working with finance staff in an appropriate stage gating process so that the appropriate funds are in the appropriate year.
So it's not always that if we give you more, if we add more onto your budget, because council wants to accomplish more, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to spend it.
Through the chair, there are certain areas where it is more difficult to spend. There are other areas where we can easily advance that spending.
Thank you. Councillor Layton has some questions.
Yeah, just on the capital side of things. Right now, when you work with local councillors, it's a minimum of 2 years before we can do a parks capital improvement, correct?
And through the chair, yes, that's correct.
And we're hiring 4 temporary capital positions in order to help with a backlog? Is that true?
Pardon me, can you tell me where your reference is for that, Councillor?
Sorry, I don't have it in my notes from before, but I thought there was an enhancement of adding positions on a temporary basis for capital work.
So through the chair, I can answer that. We are adding 4 additional positions this year: a senior project coordinator, construction coordinator, policy development officer, and a senior project officer to look at the flooding of waterfront parks and that strategy. They're all funded by capital funds, so there isn't any increase to the budget. And it's been our experience that if we can support the delivery of capital budgets through some additional staff, our delivery rate is faster and better.
So do you think that we could get that minimum 2-year down if we made these positions permanent?
Through the chair, there is still a cycle of capital development regardless of how many staff that we have working on it. So as Daniel has referenced, there's a design process, there's a tendering and procurement process, and then there's a development process. So the 2-year period is a reasonable period for many of these projects. I'm not sure what we could do to reduce that planning cycle.
So what is the average time that it takes? Because in my experience, there is an issue with just the availability of staff to implement capital improvement projects in parks.
And through the chair, we have struggled in the past because of a lack of resources, but we've, with having additional people on staff, we're able to improve our planning. And that part of that planning is being able to come out with realistic projections on timelines for projects. And that's one of the reasons that our stated time frame now, it's a 2-year, kind of a 2-year critical path, rather than trying to implement a project in 1 year when we know that it's not feasible because of the system, because of procurement process and other means.
So the line of my questioning is trying to argue for these staff to be permanent, because I think we're finding a delay in the lack of staff capacity to manage these projects through. And keeping in mind they are capital, they don't work towards our operating tax-supported budget, many of them are supported by development charges. It may be in our best interest to keep these people around and activate this money faster. But that's not a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go on next to, we're going to actually go back to long-term care homes and services. So I know Councilor McKelvey had some questions, so we'll begin with her.
Thank you,
Actually, outside councillors first. Apologize. Councillor Perks, are you good with long-term care? Okay. Say that again. Say that again. You didn't read that budget analysis? Okay. Oh. Okay. Well, I guess we have no outside councillors. We'll go to inside councillors who have questions. Councillor McKelvey, you read the analyst notes, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you can ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the presentation we saw earlier, aging demographics were listed as one of the challenges. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak to what is the peak in number of seniors? Like how many more seniors will we have next year versus the year after? And how do you see that growing over time?
I know that in 10 years, up to a third of our population is going to be seniors. In terms of actual numbers.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
So the demographic suggests that we'll hit the peak of the senior population about 2032, 2033. And at that point, I believe it's between 700,000 and 800,000 individuals in Toronto who will be senior.
Okay. And in the capital plan, you have the 10 existing homes and state of good repair on those 10 homes. Is there any plans for expansion or building of more beds or more homes?
Councillor, through the chair, just at last year's last regular council meeting, council did establish a target of an additional 978 beds for 4 of the redeveloping homes.
And then for the operations budget, so this would be your community-based programs. And I'm just wondering, we're looking at capital on 10 years. Should we, is this an area where we need to be looking at operations on a longer cycle as well, knowing that each year the number of seniors going, that will be, the demand for those community-based programs will be higher? Like how are we preparing for these increase in operations costs going forward?
Through the chair, we are planning our operating on a longer-term basis now. We're part of the overall city's plan to have forecasts, and even in this year's budget notes, you will see that there is some forecasting on operating planning. Most of the costs associated with the programs operated by long-term care homes and services are kind of controlled based on the fixed number of beds that we would operate. They're approved beds, and the community programs is primarily tied to the amount of provincial funding that we receive.
And the last question is, we have a youth equity strategy, a poverty reduction strategy. Is there something similar for seniors that's kind of looking at how we're integrating and bringing all these programs together going forward? Is that something that we should be planning on doing maybe in the next few fiscal years?
Through the chair, we do have a senior strategy, and we'll also be reporting out, as I mentioned in the presentation, council asked us to report out on creating a seniors housing and services entity within the city, and that report will be coming this spring.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Layton?
Yes. Thank you very much. There is a line that talks about service efficiencies, the consolidating and streamlining operations, transforming and modernizing model of care, and restructuring of administrative support. Can you give me an idea what consolidating and streamlining operations is?
Through the chair, yes, that is a number of actions that we take. It's part of our longer-term plan of finding efficiencies year over year. So we identify a number of savings, and they just get consolidated and rolled into this overall number. It involves everything from looking at each one of our homes, each one of our program areas, service areas, and identifying where there is some savings that can be achieved. In addition to that, we've also done some minor restructuring that gets captured in this number. So wherever we can squeeze out some savings, we have identified it in this area.
So I think we're going to, because of the discussion last year about lack of additional staff time for training, the paid staff time for training, if I remember correctly, we're going to need to get much more specific with this. What does, where do we save these hours? Because it looks like there's 0.9 positions in consolidating and streamlining operations, and then some other positions in the administrative reduction. I'm really curious as to how, like, did we just have 4 additional admin people hanging out and we can tell them to go home now? Or what is it that these people won't be doing with their time?
So, sorry, Councillor. My response was specific to the one business case. So as far as the administrative restructuring, that particular area is our support staff, where we had identified some opportunity to eliminate some positions that were vacant, that we could use those positions and create higher skilled positions, and the use of some automation, and also reviewing and changing some of our business practices. So we streamlined some of our processes. So overall, yes, there was a reduction of 4 FTEs equivalent through this process that we did. And this is our support staff.
So support staff internally or within the long-term care homes?
Across the 10 long-term care homes and at our head office. So we centralized some functions. We had also put in some higher level positions in the homes, and that's the net result, those 4 FTEs in savings. As far as the other business case, we had done some changes in our model of care, so we did look at our management structure. We also had looked at using our staff to the maximum that we can with the skill sets that they have. So looking at our registered staff, our non-registered staff, and also, again, the introduction and modernization of technology.
Okay, and then on the line transformation and modernization of model of care, is that what you just discussed? Because it's $100,000, and I don't get how that's a savings if there's no staff reduction.
So through the chair, yes. What we did there was, that was the one I had just mentioned, where we are using staff, realigning some of the work processes. So frankly, it was a decrease in some of our registered staff and an equivalent increase in hours of service with non-registered staff, and that produced the savings.
So what's the difference between registered staff and non-registered staff?
Registered staff would be your registered nurses, your registered practical nurses, and non-registered staff is personal support workers.
Okay, and finally, if the chair will beg my indulgence, the user fee piece, how much of, what kind of user fee increases are we looking at? The revenue changes have them identified with the care funding, level of care funding. How much are we seeing in user fee increases?
Through the chair, the user fees are established under provincial regulation. And it's a complicated process because what happens is residents who are in basic accommodation are eligible to receive a rate reduction, and that rate reduction is funded through provincial subsidies. So each year we have to determine how many residents are eligible for a rate reduction based on the fees that are established. And so this year's budget was a little bit of a correction for us as to how many people were getting reductions in fees, how many could pay more of the user fees. So as I say, it's all under provincial regulation, and that's for the basic accommodation and also for preferred accommodations.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll?
Yes, I'm actually not going to be that specific about the budget, but I did a lot of zipping to the back and looking at service levels for budgets that I reviewed. And for this division, the service levels don't tell you anything. I'm wondering, is there a plan to get to where they would actually tell us the level of service such that it would really, to tell me that resident care long stay is approved for being provided 366 days a year, 365 in other years, doesn't tell me what happens there. Doesn't tell me what our service standards are. As a service level is supposed to tell me how many times does a long-term caregiver actually make contact with a long-term stay person. Is there any ambition to attack that in service levels such that we would really be able to tell the level of care by looking at service levels so that we would know if our staffing was what it should be?
Through the chair, that is a very complicated question because there are a number of indicators, but you would have to take a look at probably a basket of services to get the kind of information that you're looking for. And while we have that at a management level, there is not information that is readily available that would be I guess, consumable by the public. We do work with other service providers. The Municipal Benchmarking Network has been looking at service levels, at how to measure and compare. So we use, the ones that we use for public reporting have been the number of days available, our case mix index, which is an indicator of your care levels relative to the provincial averages, and we also use customer satisfaction.
But that's not what I see on the service level page. I just see that long-term care, if you're in a home, is available 365 days a year, and if you're in the home, personal care is available 52 weeks a year. That doesn't tell me anything about what that means, what our level of service is. What does personal care mean, therefore? How many hours is available to each client? Do you need more staff, less staff? If there was any change, do you see what I'm saying? If there was any change in how we're serving people inside a long-term care home based on our staffing, it wouldn't show up in service levels here because the home would still be open 365 days a year. I have no way of measuring in service levels what happens inside that place. So is there, do finance staff who monitor service levels before we adopt them ever say, can we get a little more detail here, division?
Well, I can respond from the division's vantage point. Perhaps it is the selection of which ones have been used to present here. So these have been volume indicators as opposed to service level indicators, and we could look at in consultation with financial planning in future years as to maybe a different mixture of indicators that could be provided here.
That would be helpful because there seems to be, if you don't mind my saying, Mr. Chair, I'm putting it here in the form of a question, but it seems to me that if in some services we can, in hard service you can tell me the snow has to be exactly a certain number of centimeters deep and then we'll come out and shovel it. How many times does a long-term care client have to ring the bell for a staff member to come? Like some indicator of whether or not we're really meeting the need once you're in the place. Or once you've asked for the home care. There's no measurable here.
So through the chair, just to assure you, we are looking at it at Community and Social Services. We have a whole team that's looking across at our service levels and also how we measure outcomes so that we can provide better information to council. So that is coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Next one is Shelter Support Housing Administration, which includes Toronto Community Housing. So we'll begin with outside councillors. Councillor Perks first.
Hi. So I'm looking at the analyst notes here in terms of the tables near the front, page 19 for the capital state of good repair. The numbers there don't include TCHC, right? TCHC is a separate table somewhere else.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. So according to this, currently you're at about 10% state of good repair backlog, and at the end of the plan you'll be at 20, the backlog is 10% of asset value, and at the end of the 10 years we're projecting it'll be 20% of the asset value.
Through the chair, that's correct. It is important to note that we've really focused on 500 million for GSR, as well as the 178 for the shelter beds and the AODA compliance.
Oh, I understand you've got other needs, but I'm correct.
Yes, that's correct.
The state of good repair backlog doubles over the 10-year plan.
Correct.
As a percentage of asset value. Okay. And some of that's reflected further on in the note on page 32, table 8, where you talk about the unmet capital needs. Can you tell me more about the renewal of lease at 625 Church? That's an unmet need there?
Through the chair, the owner is looking at developing the site. Actually, the end of last week, we've got notice that that timing may change, and so we're just working with the owner currently.
But you describe it here as an unmet need, which means it's not currently budgeted for?
That's correct, and it may not be based on new information from last week. We may have a longer period of time there.
So it would be a need that we might have to meet next year instead?
Yeah, or down the road.
Or down the road, okay. In terms of, and I don't know if this is you who needs to give me some advice, or Ms. Levita, or whom. So we heard earlier in the day that the capital plan for TCH, which is talked about in here, and they don't come and do a separate thing, so I can't ask them. Oh, okay. So the capital plan that was shown in the budget highlight document that we got at the beginning showed that the backlog as a percentage of asset value increases by about 80% over the course of the 10-year capital plan that we have in front of us. First of all, I want to confirm that that's accurate.
That's accurate without city funding of 160 million a year, 2020 through 2028.
Okay. And I know that we put an awful lot of effort in the last few years into finding funding for TCH so that we weren't closing units as a result of the city not stepping up and helping you get those repairs done. And I know that we're good for this year, but seeing that backlog climb again, when do we start closing units again if the city doesn't come forward?
It's an excellent question. So
that's why I asked it.
In 2017, prior to the city stepping up to fund capital, 160 million annually, we had 618 units permanently closed.
Yes.
With the city stepping up in 18, we've been able to reopen 143.
Okay.
Of those 680 units.
Yes.
If we have a fully funded plan, if the city steps up.
Address your remarks to the plan that's here.
The plan that's there,
yeah.
We will start closing units in a significant way in 2021.
So we will start closing units again in a significant way in 2021.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you. And Sheila, if you hold tight for me, please.
I will.
So I just want to make sure I understand the numbers correctly. So on the analyst notes, page 33, so the projected 10-year capital state of good repair backlog from 2019 to 2028 is is it $3 billion?
Without city funding, it will grow to 3.16 billion. Without city funding after 2019.
Okay. So I seen here, so it says through a variety of funding strategies, TCHC is able to address 1.13 billion of the 3.4 billion requirement, leaving a funding gap of 2.3 billion. I just want to understand what the state of good repair backlog is, so is TCHC planning to address a little over $1 billion of the backlog on its own?
Over what time period?
From 2019 to 2028. When I'm looking,
So if I could, the backlog by 2028, without federal funding, without provincial funding, without the city's 160 million a year, the total backlog will grow to 3.16. Okay? Total.
so but that assumes, just to be clear, that assumes no federal or additional city funding?
Or provincial.
Okay. Okay. And following up on Councillor Perk's questions, if there is no announcement of additional federal, provincial, or city funding, significant units will have to start being closed in 2021 if there is no announcement?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Lau.
Thank you. Can you remind us again what the capital spending has been since 2013 on a yearly basis?
I can, if you just allow me a minute to pull the right file. So in 2013, we spent 60 million. In 2014, 128. In 2015, 175. In 2016, 238. In 17, 250. And in 2018, 300.
Okay. And you're projecting for 2019?
313.1.
So 313. Was last year the first year ever in the history of Toronto Community Housing that actually the city had a line item on its capital budget?
That's correct.
160 million.
Correct.
And this year has 160 million again.
173.1.
Oh, 173.1. And so you said that you've been able to reduce the units closed to 580.
Correct.
And you're planning to reduce that this year to reopen over 100 units again?
If the funding continues, yes.
So what we've been doing is you've always had your capital plan funded every year, correct?
Correct.
You always, every year, have come to this committee and showed us if we don't fund the plan, this is what will happen, correct?
Correct.
Is that what you're doing today?
We are responding to a presentation by city staff.
So if we don't fund, like we did this year and last year and the year before, what you're showing us is without city, provincial, and federal fund, this is what's happened. You're not showing anything different from what you've shown us the past 4 years that we've increased your funding for capital, correct? Okay. And do you have an application for the National Housing Strategy in the process at asking for funding as well?
So we've worked with Shelter Support and Housing to make a portfolio-wide ask of the National Housing Strategy.
And are you working with the city on a new funding formula for TCHC? And maybe I should ask the Deputy City Manager this. Are we expecting a new funding formula that actually will address the operating and the capital budgets of TCHC for the future?
That's correct. Council asked us to report back in advance, well in advance of the 2020 budget, on a permanent funding model to address TCHC's capital and operating pressures.
So that is why we have this presentation in front of us, and as you're doing the funding formula, you will take these pressures in consideration.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council. I'll take it to inside councillors on the committee. Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, following along the same tack. So When I'm looking at the state of good repair funding and backlog, I'm talking about TCHC now, but as it is presented in your budget. So, page 22, when I'm looking at SOGR funding and backlog here, am I looking at exactly what we've been talking about here? I see 168 in 2018, 173. That's TCHC plus whatever you were using in the rest of the division? Is that what that chart is? Does that include TCHC?
Through the chair, that's exclusively TCHC.
It's exclusively TCHC.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's just
both.
shelter, support, and housing.
It's exclusively shelter, support, and housing.
Yeah.
So do we have another problem here? Why in this one does it drop down to, by 2021, we're down to 900,000? Is that all you need that year for all the shelters that we will have, which will be more than we used to have?
So through the chair, we've got a number of projects going. George Street Revitalization,
Right.
AODA, as well as the George Street Transition Plan leading into the closure of Seton House.
Right.
So there's a number of pieces there. The regular state of good repair budget is 900,000 just for shelter, support, and housing.
Regular, so it doesn't address backlog, which is why here I see this backlog climbing as well. Doubling.
Through the chair, that's correct. We have been focusing on those large projects in this particular budget, the GSR, AODA, the transition plan.
So if you know, that's doubling, and we know that in TCHC and in Shepherd, that in shelter housing, that's not going to fly. This plan is going to come back with amounts. I'm wondering why in this budget, unlike other budgets, if we know we're going to put money in, why are we not putting a placeholder in there so that we're being honest about what we know our debt levels will be? It seems to me you could at least put in $100 million in housing so that there is a 10-year capital placeholder. Because if not, I'm just going to go nuts using that available debt. Why wouldn't I? Why is there not a placeholder for these things? In body-worn cameras this morning, they have no idea how much they're going to cost, but they know they're spending $1 million this year. They put a placeholder of $2 million next year and $3 million the next year. You know, it might be $8 million, but they at least put a placeholder so we won't go nuts and spend the money. Why are we not doing that here?
Through the chair, I think one of the pieces was we were asked to come back with the TCHC funding model.
Are you not concerned in the least that by the time you come back, we might have spent the money on some of the things that councillors love to spend money on? Should you not put a placeholder in to save us from ourselves?
Would you like me to answer that? Through you, Mr. Chair. So just to be crystal clear, for our friends here in shelter, support, and housing, their backlog is actually virtually eliminating, so it's not doubling.
That's not what the chart says. The chart says it's going to go from 40 to 120 million.
Page 19 and 20.
Page 22.
22, yes.
So it's going from 7 million to 32. Right?
What then what is the point of this graph that says backlog as a percentage of asset value is going to go from 40 million up to 120 million? It's going to go from 0% to 20%.
So it's going from 7.5% to 20.9% as a result of their 2018 audit.
Right, so if we know that's not tenable, and we know we're coming back with a plan, and a 10-year plan is notional, the 5-year dollars have to be real, the 10-year plan is notional, why are we not using placeholders anymore? And I'm really not joking. I may sound theatrical, but I'm really not joking, because I'm talking about what is a normal practice. Yeah. Why are we not engaging in it any longer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we remember the presentation that we did at launch, we were at 14.93% of our debt capacity based on what is funded in the 10-year capital plan. To place something in the plan requires the funding source along with it. So at this point, the 19 to 28 capital plan, as funded by what you have before you, is what we can fund at this point in time.
So what the real answer is that the fact that it's not in the budget later, I should not be calmed by the fact that there's a plan coming later this year, because that plan will have no funding. And beyond next year, we have no capital funding to give to TCHC, is what you are saying.
So
have we hit the wall now?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we are, based on the work that we've done for this 10-year plan, we are capped, but we continue to do work with all our program areas annually as we go through the review. We brought in debt capacity this year of almost $700 million that we added. Critical state of good repair. It just wasn't those items. We will continue to do that work based on spending rates, stage gating, all the things that we talk about, which annually has brought us the capacity. We have more work to do with everyone because we're still at 65 to 70%. And we also will look at other funding sources as we identified in the presentation as well. So those are all things that continue to be a major effort for the city to find the room to do the things that we need to do.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Nunziata.
To shelter housing. Do you have a cost of some of the shelters that we previously approved, and there's been delays in opening these shelters? What the cost is, an additional cost that we've had to through these delays for whatever reason?
Through the chair, there has been many sites. Some have been more expensive, some have been under. If there was a specific piece, we could look at that for you, Councillor.
Okay, well, I'm told that the one for Runnymede, there was an issue with it because we have asbestos. So my question is, why would we lease a facility if we have asbestos in the building and it's being delayed and it's all these additional costs?
Through the chair, we are definitely working on that particular site. We look at all of those factors, working with other divisions within the city, and move forward on a plan. If the site is not feasible, then we abandon the site, which we've abandoned many sites, through the last couple of years. In terms of Runnymede, we could look at those specific questions for you.
It's not just Runnymede; it's just all of them. Like before we lease a facility for shelter, why don't we check? Why don't we have staff, or why aren't we checking these facilities out that they're that there are no issues that are going to happen a year, 2 years later? Because then you're waiting, there's all these delays. And why aren't we checking into that?
Through the chair, we are doing that. We do have a comprehensive process to do that currently, working with facilities management. And we've looked at hundreds of sites, and we have abandoned a number of sites for similar reasons.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. That's up to the committee. Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. This is very specific to the one bit of new and enhanced service that's not included in the 2019 budget, and that's this additional funding to enhance drop-in services. Can I assume that this is the women's drop-in at Sistering, and I believe the second one's Fred Victor?
Through the chair, no, Councillor, that was specific for the 29 drop-ins, daytime drop-ins throughout the city that serve the 1.3 million meals, those types of things.
But if I'm not mistaken, we requested additional enhanced drop-in services for the 24-hour women's drop-in as part of some report in the last year of council, and it's not appearing here.
Through the chair, I'm not aware of that particular piece. This specific one was, this was a specific request last year at council that is related to that in the notes.
Okay.
It was the daytime drop-ins.
Listen, okay, I'm going to go and find it, but it's the list that we provided in the briefing note today. Just for the record, all the stuff we referred to staff that's providing in that's provided in the briefing note 10, not 10, 4 or 3, the new and enhanced service requests not included. The list is feeling a little light their senior staff. I'm not sure if it had all the things that we mentioned as part of reports, as things that were added onto reports. I'm not sure they're all reflected in there, including this request that we made very clearly. Councillor Cressy may remember, or Councillor Bailao, because she's now the local councillor, but we made a request for Sistering and the other 24-hour women's drop-ins to receive additional support. So I'm not sure where it's gone in the wash here, but I'm not entirely sure why it's not appearing here. So specific to this one, why isn't it being considered for inclusion in the report? Is it not necessary anymore?
Through the chair, it was balancing off all of the different requests and the service that are provided currently in those daytime drop-ins.
So balancing being, in order to meet your 0% increase, or as close as you could get to it, something needed to be removed.
Through the chair, with the very significant increase, the 45 million for the refugees, a number of the other projects that we have going on, 28 million for the respite sites, the new shelter capacity, all of those things considered, that's why that one was at lower on the list.
Okay. In a world of infinite budgets for SSHA, this would be included?
Through the chair, infinite budgets don't exist, I don't think so. It's a good question.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Are there any other questions? Do we want to entertain a second round of questions, committee? Committee members, do we want to maybe? Yeah, I'm just part of it. We're, again, trying to move things along here, so, okay. Okay. Next is social development, finance, and administration. Do we have questions on social development, finance, and administration?
SDFA's CPIP grants, right? What's going on with them? Are they going up with inflation?
Okay, I think.
Then, can I just confirm one thing with SDFA around the CPIP grants? What's the annual increase in the CPIP grants?
The corporate rate that was discussed, 2.1.
You should use Park's rate of inflation. To be fair, and I could ask this all individually or as a rhetorical question. They said it was food, it was hydro utility costs, which I assume are the same for these partners in the sea. It's like when we want to raise more money, we use a higher inflation. We want to give less money, we use a lower inflation.
Our providers have very varied context, so we wouldn't be able to get to that level of detail.
Okay, next is Toronto Employment and Social Services. Questions for Toronto Employment and Social Services? Okay. Next, we're going to go, so the next two agencies, we're going to get into a presentation from Infrastructure and Development Services, but first we'll do questions of public health and questions of the Toronto Public Library. So do we have questions of public health? Councillor, yeah, I was going to say, it's not Nunziata there. Councillor Cressy, this is for for public health? Yeah. We'll just get everybody to quieten down a bit, please. Thanks.
Thank you. So, to our medical officer of health, could you confirm what the Board of Health approved budget was that that was submitted to you in net? So at the November meeting of the Board of Health, the Board of Health approved a budget. I'm wondering if you could confirm what it was.
Yeah. So yes, through the chair.
Yep.
And I admit my numbers are tiny here. So I'm looking at a net of 256,927 gross, 256,927 gross.
256 million, that was the Board of Health approved budget. What is the staff presented budget here? So
Staff presented budget through the chair was 254,979.2.
And so that gap between the two is what? If your math is better than mine, I assume it is.
Through the chair, that's a dangerous assumption, but it is 1,947.7.
1 million, sorry.
Sorry. Yes, 1,947,000.
1,977?
47?
947.
47.
Okay, so the 1.9 million, so the Board of Health has a budget committee which did a deep dive into the budget and presented the Board of Health with a budget. The Board of Health presented a budget at 256 million, but the budget I'm looking at in front of me is 1.9 million less. What was cut out of the budget?
Yeah, do you want to go ahead?
Through the chair, there was a reduction based upon a review of all our positions for roughly $2.2 million, and that was offset by increases to support, just one second, to support some additional, it was offset by some annualizations to take care of increases for one-time funding, some base changes, some increases for the 100% funded provincial programs, as well as some increased costs dealing with our SIS because we had longer operating hours. And all that information could actually be found on page 36 of the budget notes.
So, but clarify for me, so what program did the Board of Health approve to be included in the budget, but the staff budget in front of me does not include? So I understand there were some minor adjustments made, but what program is not being included here? I think there's a student nutrition program.
That's correct, the student nutrition program.
So what student nutrition program was supported by the Board of Health but is not in front of us here?
It would be the student nutrition program for independent schools.
And what is the student nutrition program for independent schools?
So through the chair, this is a program or a proposed expansion for a program that has existed for quite some time in the city. The student nutrition program provides funding for a morning meal, largely a morning meal to be provided to schools that are demonstrated to have some need.
Okay, and what is the cost of that expansion of the student nutrition program that the Board of Health asked for to be included in the budget but is not?
I'll just confirm the numbers for you. It's actually this figure, is it not? So through the chair, it's a total of $625,000.
$625,000 net.
Net, that's correct.
So that's the city's contribution. Okay.
That is correct.
And the difference, that $1.9 million difference between the Board of Health budget and the budget in front of us, is that the only programmatic reduction, the expansion of student nutrition program, or is there another program that had a reduction or was not included?
There were two other items that the board approved for the budget, and that had to do with providing additional funding for Creating Health Plus, and the Toronto Food Policy Council.
Okay, so what was the reduction for the Toronto Food Policy Council?
It was not a reduction per se. What it was additional funding to support these two particular programs, and combined, the amount is 0.85 million gross, 0.21 million net. 21 million net.
219,000 net.
219.
And sorry, just so I'm on the same page, so the Board of Health approved the expansion of the student nutrition program at 625,000 net and an increase for the Toronto Food Policy Council at 219,000 net. Are there any other programs that the Board of Health approved budget, that the Board of Health approved in the budget that are not here?
That's, through the chair, that's everything.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor. Any other councillors, questions, outside councillors on Board of Health? Okay, we'll take it into committee. Okay, now, Liz, I do have a request from Councillor Nunziata that she had some questions. She's just out for the moment, so if it's okay with it, everybody would, you can get back in her chair if you know the questions, you can answer them, but no. If I'm just going to hold this down just to allow her to ask her questions when she gets back. So Board of Health can just wait for a few minutes. Let's do library, and then we'll go back. So public library. Councillor Perks.
Oh, you started my time. I better start asking even if you're not settled in. I see in the summary of the budget notes, the analyst notes, there's an increase in tenant leasing and room rental revenues. I assume that's just an annual increase you're putting in. What % increase is that on those leases?
So that's based on our actual estimate of usage in terms of lease renewals. So it's really a market rate. Only on our room bookings, where we community room bookings, that's the only one that has an automatic inflationary increase. That's about 2%.
You're doing about 2% there? Okay, thank you. On that same page, I see that there's a savings or a service change to increase gapping from 2.8 to 3.0%.
Yes, that's correct.
And is that because of some kind of change in staff complement, or is that just to save money?
No, it was based on an analysis that we've done. We actually gapped about 3.5% last year because of the closure of North York Central. So we did an analysis of our gapping experience based, taking that out of the equation, and found that it's that 3% is where we're really at.
It's where you're really at. I forget, what's our corporate target for gapping?
We're averaging, through Mr. Chair, we're averaging about 2.8 to 3%.
And that's the target?
Everyone has a separate target, but that is our average.
Okay, thank you. Going to my favorite questions about the capital program, which I think are on pages 9 and 10. No. Oh, Lord, I've lost them. The capital backlog as a percent of assets. So currently it sits at about 5.5%. And the plan, the 10-year capital plan has that increasing by about 150% so that it'll be 12% at the end of it?
That's based on a building condition assessment that's about 5 years old, and we recently completed a facilities master plan. We revisited some of our assumptions. Our feeling is that those numbers are very low and should be more like in the range of about double those numbers. We're in the process of updating our building condition assessment this year, and we will be coming back with an updated SOGR backlog. But we feel those numbers, the 6% and 12%, are probably closer to 10% and 20% based on what we found out.
From your latest, though, the backlog 10 years from now with our current capital plan will be twice what it currently is?
Approximately, yes.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Turning to page 30 in the analyst notes, I see that there are 3 new libraries, or 3 new library projects, including the City Hall relocation, and 5 planned repairs. So for a total of 8 branches that are listed as unmet capital needs in the 10-year plan. So those are things from, you know, I know you did a lot of work, you brought in consultants, showed what you need to do. These are 8 libraries, or whatever, 8 libraries that should be in the 10-year capital plan to meet your long-term plan, but are not. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and going to the service levels, so page 43, and I see that with the library materials budget, on a per capita basis, the collection's getting smaller. I see that 2 pages over, in terms of the library space per 100,000, it's declining. I see on page 47, In terms of the amount of internet access per capita, that's declining. So the budget that we have here in a variety of service levels, if you do it per capita and not just year-to-year budget, we're actually seeing a decline in service levels, the ones that I just enumerated.
Despite the increase in the budget, the population is estimated to grow at a higher rate, and that's why the per capita service levels are declining slightly, yes.
Yeah. So we're just not keeping up with population growth in terms of the services that we provide, those service metrics.
Yes, it's a very small decrease.
Happens every year, it becomes a bigger one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll take it inside committee. Committee members, questions? Councillor Carroll.
So Councillor Burks was asking about the unmet state of good repair backlog growing over time. It goes from 68 million to 145 million in backlog. There is within libraries, though, a lot of improvement going on that's development charge-based, that's growth-based. Is there part of the facilities index evaluation, does that include looking at what in that backlog could be taken care of while they're doing growth projects as well?
Well, certainly every project that we work on, every branch renovation, we address both service improvements as well as state of good repair needs, as well as expansion and growth needs. So most projects address all three issues. We never only just do SOGR work. We always address service needs while we're there. It's a better investment.
Well, right, but I'm thinking of not an SOGR project, but a growth project. I'll use an example in my ward because it's a very small one, but I imagine you have bigger ones elsewhere in the system. Tiny little Pleasant View branch will somewhere in the next couple of years will finally get its the Section 37 monies that are contributing to doing a what is a growth related thing there, putting in automated checkout, putting in a printer studio and such. It's all been designated in a growth program. Would that be a facility, for example, where if you're going in to do that, you're also going to do an evaluation of the SOGR there? And can you do it? If you're using those development charges that are available to libraries, can you also do the SOGR work?
So the development charges we'll only use for the growth-related portion of the project, and there's also a separate state of good repair portion. So we break it out, and development charges are used only for a portion that relates to growth.
Right, and currently at the funding level that you're seeing now over the next 10 years, it's enough where those opportunities arise that you know of? You think you have enough?
For the growth,
in the 10-year fund?
For the growth portion, yes. But
no, I mean for the SOGR point. Where those opportunities arise, you really can't defer those because now you're in the building. Right. Do you think you have enough within the state of good repair funding that you'll be able to realize those opportunities?
We feel that because the state of good repair backlog is growing, that the funding is inadequate to meet our state of good repair needs to at least keep the backlog from growing. It is growing, so we feel that the funding is inadequate.
Okay, and I only have one operating question, Mr. Chair. In terms of the number of positions and hours of operation, it was hard for me to tell because I didn't do a deep dive into this one as I did with some other divisions, but I'm just wondering, there isn't a huge growth in positions, but there was the North York Library, the Central Library over at Yonge Street, coming back on stream would have meant a growth in positions, I would think, because it was closed for a fair amount of time. Or were they just being, were those positions just being relocated elsewhere, and that's why I don't see a jump?
Well, we increased our gapping. That was, I mentioned our gapping last year experience was about 3.5%. And that was because we didn't fill positions that became vacant when the North York Central Library was closed.
Okay. And so you're at a high rate of gapping now?
We're about 3% now.
Okay, so that's why I don't see a big jump with the library coming back on stream at Yonge Street.
No, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Again, other questions? Seeing none, Councillor Nunziata, we held down Board of Health for you. I think you had a few questions you wanted to ask.
So last year, when we went through the budget, we gave the additional funding to you, and we were told at the time that the reorg review that was outstanding for the past 2 years, that you would have it ready this year. And my question is, why is it not ready?
So through the chair, that process is actually underway and is being implemented this year.
And you're bringing it forward this year?
Through the chair, yes, and it will be managed within budget.
So it's not part of the budget that we have before us?
Through the chair, there isn't a specific reflection in the budget because at this stage of the game, there isn't something to reflect in the budget. However, the plan is to implement that which was put forward in our organization review starting this year, and it will be more than 1 year endeavor.
It was my understanding that last year that we were told that the review would have an impact in the 2019 budget.
So at this stage of the game, through the chair, we don't have an impact to show at this stage, but we expect that as we implement and go forward with our organization review and the plan, that there may be opportunities to reflect that in future budget years.
Thank you. Okay, next we're going to go to Infrastructure and Development Services. We're going to have a presentation, and then we'll get into all the individual divisions after that.
Good afternoon.
So welcome.
I'm just trying to get the presentation up on the slides, on the screens. Someone? Is our tech people helping us here? Tech support. When in doubt, I'm calling on fire to fix this. Ah, there we go. All right. All right, so thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present on the budget for Infrastructure and Development Services, compilation of numerous divisions. I do want to start by thanking everybody that worked so hard on putting this together. I know we've had a compressed timeline and have had some very hardworking and talented people trying to make this as painless as possible, so just thank you to them. Similarly to my friend DCM Carboni, we're going to walk through just some overview highlights of the service area and then some specifics on the operating and capital budgets. So when we talk about infrastructure and development services, formerly known as Cluster B, we look at the types of services that we provide in the areas that we focus on. With city building, mobility, infrastructure, renewal development, community safety, and across many, many services that the people that live in this city enjoy every day. This is supported through a number of council-adopted strategies and plans, and they go from very large foundational pieces, such as our official plan, to very localized, focused issues, such as our residential infill strategy, and everything in between. Certainly, Vision Zero and our Master Fire Plan are a couple of key strategies that help advance community safety. All of these services are delivered. IDS is a compilation of approximately 9 different divisions. We also have a couple of embedded divisions with OEM and MCIC that does the capital infrastructure coordination. We are approximately 8,700 FTE on the operating side, with capital staff about 9,400. We are currently sitting with about 92% of those positions filled, though we are experiencing some challenges with vacancies in some of our highly skilled areas, but we are still working to fill those. So this is day 4 in this role, and it's a great opportunity for me to look at all the great work that these divisions in our service area deliver. So what we've chosen to do, instead of going division by division with accomplishments, is really look at those themes and those ways that the divisions collectively contribute to advancing mobility for one. So some of our key successes, 2015 to 2017, with the traffic signal retiming, is starting to result in some good, meaningful savings of time for folks. Our King Street pilot project is certainly showing some improved commute times for transit in the afternoon rush. The implementation of Vision Zero, we are accelerating as per Council's direction and support last year, and continuing to install red light camera locations, at which we've seen a significant reduction in serious injuries and fatalities. So definitely investments well worth the time and money. and we're expanding the cycling network. When we look at what we do as far as city building and vitality, there's a number of frameworks and really large plans that the service area delivered last year, two of which talk about TO Core and Midtown in Focus, are two of the largest area plans that have been completed, and certainly gives us some growth management frameworks that includes not just the built environment, but also those hard and soft infrastructure pieces that really build a community. At the same time, we've worked at mitigating local impacts from residential infill, led by Toronto Building, supported by numerous divisions. MLS, fine division that it is, has implemented the, sorry, I had to do a plug once. I love you all equally now. But the implementation of our apartment building program and the Rent Safe TO is certainly going to be a program that reaps benefits as we go forward, having evaluated all of our buildings, and our good friends in fire and their focus on inspections of all our multi-res, high-rise residential. It would be remiss not to talk about the amount of infrastructure development and work that goes on with our partners at Toronto Water, ECS, Transportation, a couple of which I'll highlight. The significant progress we're making on dealing with stormwater and wastewater projects, incredibly almost signature projects, I've been told, substantial impact, all going towards improving the quality of the water that we enjoy in our inner harbor, the Don River, Taylor-Massey Creek. The rehabilitation of the Gardiner Expressway, massive undertaking. Last year awarded the contract. This year we're going to start construction, and I understand the whole thing's going to be done by 2026. Michael DeAndre has committed to that, no pressure. As well as advancing our long-term waste management strategy. Again, a number of initiatives there, including the opportunity to sell renewable natural gas. So a lot of very interesting things happening. The green bins that everybody has come to enjoy, and the raccoons less so now. We've seen a 70% decline in the number of service requests with the rollout of these new bins. So I think we're seeing some great success for folks that way. Another large infrastructure project, again, another signature was around the Portland's flood protection. And what that is going to do through a tripartite contribution, a $1.2 billion project, and it's going to unlock 290 hectares of land for development. So in addition to building, and we've also been educating, a lot of what we do requires the community to participate, whether it be through behavior change or whether it simply be through letting them know how to dispose of garbage properly or how to manage their pets appropriately. So a lot of activity in this service area on public education, keeping people informed and hopefully engaged. So with all that, of course, we have our challenges as well. As many have spoken about, growing and changing city. So we are seeing an increasing number of very large, high priority, large scale projects, many intergovernmental, certainly with transit planning and the expansion of transit we're seeing in the city, the waterfront revitalization. As well, the demands from building permits and other licensing permits, I guess, victims of our success. We do see those increases in volumes and naturally the extent of work that comes from that. At the same time, managing traffic congestion and the like. We're focusing on community public engagement, as I mentioned previously, really driving behavior change, getting people involved and engaged in how we operate our communities and making them more livable through educating on proper waste management, and certainly something that will be a focus this year is on road safety. Challenges from an infrastructure, maintenance, repair. We have an aging infrastructure. There's been a lot of discussion today thus far on state of good repair and the backlog, and we'll speak to that a little bit. But that is always, it's certainly a challenge for us as well, and keeping pace with our growing capital plan. Certainly there have been challenges in attracting and retaining some skilled talent we need in some of our divisions, which has some impact on our ability to deliver on some of the capital, but we're continuing to work through that. Our other challenge, as previously referenced, as well as about addressing emerging needs, is really the more frequent impact of weather events, or that we're seeing 1 in 100-year storms a little bit more frequently, some with significant impacts. I know Councillor Nunziata had some challenges in her ward this year in August when a 1 in 100-year rainfall fell and sat right in your area. So certainly, how do we as a city address that? How do we prepare? What do we need to do from our infrastructure standpoint, as well as what do we do with our emergency management response? We all know of the couple of issues we've had with private residential buildings falling victim to significant impacts, and our need to respond and help those folks. So as we think through this, I'm working to get this in 15 minutes, is some of the priorities for us for this year. And certainly, again, responding to and meeting the needs of a growing, changing city. Huge focus this year, as has been in the past, on transportation, transit planning, and just on our growth overall. As I mentioned earlier, the Portlands project is significant. Vision Zero is a significant focus, as well as equipping and ensuring that our fire services can respond to the increasingly vertical city that we're living in, as well as addressing other new issues such as cannabis, and making sure people can move around the city. Priority as well in investing in our infrastructure. You will see a little bit later the capital plan, and that will highlight some of the larger initiatives underway. I've already mentioned the focus on Vision Zero, our cycling network, and making sure people that are on our streets can be there safely. And responding to, as I mentioned, the extreme weather events, and looking at what we can do from an infrastructure standpoint as well as a response standpoint. We have a number of initiatives going on from a business modernization and transformation standpoint. A couple of these really involve cross-divisional projects. Janie from PF&R mentioned the Enterprise Work Management System. That also includes 3 divisions in IDS, as well as an initiative with MLS and Toronto Fire on looking at a system that will help integrate enforcement and inspection. I thought I'd take just a minute to speak to an item that came up through the corporate presentation, which is about the rebate in solid waste. There is a slide there for you. You can have a look through the numbers. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but it does show what the anticipated impact is for citizens each of these years as the rebate is phased out. Solid waste management is a utility, and the focus or goal has been to move it to a user-based, pay-as-you-go facility, just as Toronto Water is. So we thought we'd try to display the impact of the rebate this way. So when you see the extra large bin actually was phased out a couple of years ago, and the current annual cost to a homeowner is approximately $497 per year. As we roll out on the large bin, they'll be at $347 and so on, 2-year phase out for medium and 3-year phase out for small. Each of these results in approximately anywhere from $1.30 to $1.50-ish increase per week per homeowner. Certainly another item we're looking at in waste management is a multi-year financial strategy and looking at their facility plans as well. So from an operating budget standpoint, IDS in its totality represents approximately $2.9 billion gross budget. You can see the distribution. Certainly a large extent of that comes from our good friends in Toronto Water at $1.3 billion, and the rest is distributed around. From a reliance on the property tax base, IDS budget approximately 25% or $734 million is funded through the tax levy. So when we look at the changes for IDS as a service area, overall it's approximately 1.2% net increase, though that is offset with a significant increase with Toronto Fire, primarily due to their collective agreement, settlement, and the cost of salaries is the biggest chunk of that, and Toronto Building as well as upsizing or right-sizing their contribution, which has not been subject to inflation over the past number of years. So talking about the net operating impacts or the key cost drivers, certainly we are seeing some economic factors as far as winter maintenance and other maintenance contracts go, and the largest ones being the salaries. We are 9,400 positions, all subject to salary increases, and of course a large percent of our budget. So you'll see that that's a significant contributor to our cost drivers. We're showing the new and enhanced service requests. There's 3 there's a number of them spread out 1 and 2s. The largest ones being 11 people for fire safety quality assurance inspections, a critical continuation of an effort that was undertaken last year to make sure we have fire safety in our premises. And additional resources for MLS to deal with the illegal cannabis storefronts, and Toronto Water additional positions to deal with utility cuts. Some of these are funded, some are not. From a capital budget standpoint, with a 10-year capital plan, we're looking at $19.9 billion. You can see the way it's distributed. Again, a large amount of that relies on Toronto Water and its infrastructure, 68% actually. out of the way these are funded, it looks like 68% is out of reserves and 22% relies on debt to fund. On the next slide, we're talking what is some of those specific projects that are captured in the 10-year plan, and on the right-hand side, those projects that are planned for 2019. And you'll see a lot of them, as I referenced earlier, about our successes, our challenges, and our priority actions. Many of them are listed here and do deal with state of good repair, service improvements, and just our ability to keep pace with the growth of the city. So our requested capital plan displayed over the 10 years, you'll see the bulk of it, approximately 56% or 11.2 billion, are state of good repair projects, and the balance are spread out across the other categories of need, service improvements being the next highest at 4.5 billion over the 10 years. The conversation of today about accumulated backlog. So as a division with these two divisions of Transportation, Toronto Water, we see a backlog of approximately 8.3% on the as a total of the asset value. When I split that out between the value of the assets and the relevant backlog that exists, transportation is actually sitting approximately 11.7% of its asset value in backlog, and Toronto Water at 5%. And you can see over the 10 years the significant investment that Toronto Water is making, the projects they've approved, the work that they're doing, and we see that backlog, state of good repair backlog, declining over time. Unfortunately, in transportation, it's still sitting in and around that 11.5 or 12% over that timeline. So certainly a discussion on asset management. I believe our CFO referenced in the corporate presentation, needing to look at our asset management, but also what we're doing on state of good repair. So that gives you a sense on those two particular groups. And just if you're wondering about the denominator, that's about a $56 billion asset valuation between those two divisions. And lastly, some of the unfunded projects that we have, approximately $6 billion, again, in some of the key areas of local roads, local and major road rehabilitation, and some in bridges. So I am going to conclude for me, because certainly there is a room full of extremely talented division heads and others that are ready to answer specific questions.
Thank you, Tracy. Quick, any overall questions just on, Councillor Perks had a few overall questions on the whole area. Did you have any questions that maybe pertain to that? And then we could get into the individual ones on the divisions. I'm just throwing it out there, Councillor Perks, if you good? Okay. Okay, then let's go. Apology accepted. You can ask your question.
Ms. Cook, this is the first time I get to do this with you as a deputy city manager. So I'm going to start with a question that I asked your predecessor's predecessor's predecessor, which is, and everybody in between, which is you've identified that in certain key jobs, engineering, project management, and so on, that we are having trouble hiring, retaining, and training talent. Now, given that your predecessor's predecessor's predecessor told me he had a plan, and everybody in between him and you told me they have a plan, could you give me some more detail on what the plan is so that I can have faith in it this time?
So through you, Mr. Budget Chair, I can share with you, as yet I don't have a plan, but I will be having a plan. So Mr. DeAndre and I have a date set to sit down and talk about what the challenges are. I don't know if the prior plans included drilling down to the pipeline of folks that are in school or coming out of school. I guess I'll be reviewing the last 3 or 4 plans, identifying what of those did or did not work. Certainly there needs to be a discussion about compensation levels. We are competing with surrounding municipalities and the private sector for experienced engineers. So I can tell you that we will be discussing a plan. And when I sit here in front of you next year, if I make it past today, I can tell you how the plan is or is not working.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Carroll.
You'll make it through today. If this was the old system, you'd be sitting before us first thing in the morning, fresh, and we'd be doing this for 5 days. I want to ask this generally because it's further to the conversation that we had in our meet and greet, which is the coordination across. We see the gardener coming, we see a lot of road work, we see a ton of water work, we see basement flooding, and then beyond our own work is all that underground and overhead infrastructure that the private sector is doing. Are we putting any additional funds into coordination here? Because we're still not getting there.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I do not believe that this budget includes additional funds or resources for the capital coordination. I do, as we've discussed, know that there have been challenges where that coordination needs to be better, could have been better. Certainly, as I'm getting into the position further, that is one of those key things that I want to get a better understanding of, understanding where our challenges are. If some of it relates to relationship with the utilities, then we need to fix that and we need to work on that. If some of it is simply overload of coordination, then we need to look at that. I would also suggest that coming in somewhat blind at this point, the extent to which we're programming out our capital plans and how the utilities or others, Hydro, Rogers, et cetera, are planning out their capital plans. So as I get a better sense of that, I think I'll be better suited to give you an answer. And whether or not additional resources are required from a capital infrastructure standpoint, or do we simply need to refine some of the processes that we currently have? So that's certainly going to be a project.
So would we be able to see sometime this year, such that we could put it into the 2020 budget? Anything that might be needed that might get us to a point of capital coordination? Because we're at a point now where some of the utilities would even be willing to help cover the cost. We could even come up with a program that is cost recovery, just because people would like to know if I've calendarized my capital to be in a neighborhood, am I allowed to be in the neighborhood? Can I be in this neighborhood? Because there seems to be, we seem to do locates without flagging, hey, some work may come out of this. We've just done a locate for Enbridge. Right. We need to get down to that level in our own operation. Yes. Would that be looked at, is that this year that'll be looked at?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Budget Chair, I think, Councillor Carroll, when we look at the number, the sheer volume of work that we're doing, the dollars that we're spending, and the dollars that we need to spend going forward, it's critically incumbent upon us to make sure that we are doing that as efficiently as we can. I don't think that we can afford cutting up or pulling up a roadway that we just paved.
Yeah.
We can't afford to do that. So, meeting with the team are they experts in this? I certainly am not.
Yeah.
But meeting with ECS folks, transportation, Toronto Water, and really understanding what's working, what's not working, we need to do that now. Will I have it fixed by the end of the year? I'd like to tell you yes, that's the goal. But certainly understand some of the key drivers behind where things are maybe missing, why they're missing. And the other thing I would overlay onto that is the substantial transit expansion projects that are going on across the city, right?
Right.
And I do know as well, transportation, certainly when they're doing a major road reconstruction, they're looking at the opportunity as well to embed complete streets and green design into that work and, have a full public realm where we can.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of discussion about how we coordinate and where we can maybe improve or leverage the best practice that we already have.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Now we're going to go down the running list. We'll start with city planning. Questions of city planning? Councillor Perks.
Yes. Oh, Greg. In the development review section of your budget, and I'm forgetting what it's actually called, you show a net contribution to the reserve, i.e. that development fees are such that, and the length and complexity of doing a development review means you have to put some money away. Is that sort of right?
That's generally right, yes.
Okay, now here's where my noodle is getting baked. That's what I got told last year, the year before, and the year before that. Are we just getting more development applications every single year and we never catch up and spend the money? So in 2015, I asked these questions, and in 2015 I was told, no, money's getting put into a reserve because these are complex applications. And then in 2016 I was told the same thing, in 2017 I've been told that, and this year I've been told that. Don't we ever spend the money? Because every year you're net contributing to the reserve. I've never seen a year where there was a net draw.
So through the chair, the reserve is relatively new, actually I believe 2 years old now, if I'm recalling correctly. Maybe
Ms. Levita and I have had this conversation
maybe 3.
for 4 years.
In any event, certainly with the division's end-to-end review underway and expected to report out in the next quarter, I'm anticipating that the use of that reserve will come into play in next year's budget. Our revenue has been above plan for a couple of years, and the reserve has built up. But I'm anticipating being able to employ that reserve strategically, because we also have to remember that it is for when we have a downturn, and I'm not expecting one, but you never know. But the size of applications and our application fees for some applications have been quite large. But in a year, for example, where we won't have one of those large or a couple of large applications, our revenues could be closer to plan.
So, maybe I'm confused now. I thought the reason that we started putting it into a reserve is because the fees are supposed to be on a cost recovery basis for the actual time spent by planners. Now I'm hearing that the reserve is to keep planners on staff when we have a slow time?
So through you, Mr. Chair, there are actually 2 reserves.
Oh, maybe we're talking about different ones.
So
Okay.
to be clear, the development application fee is full cost recovery.
Yes.
And that pays for all of the city's costs,
Yes.
for all the programs involved. And the only thing that goes into reserve from that would be the capital contribution, so when they're working on their capital pieces. So there's that piece. And then separately from that, we created the reserve about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Which was to acknowledge that there were applications that would come in late, the fees might come in late.
I
We wanted
see.
to ensure protection of the service level
That's right.
for the following year, so that we could actually honor that work that
So
had.
that's to complete development applications that we've got the fee, but it takes 2 years to do the work.
Correct.
And somehow that, every year that you and I have discussed it, it gets bigger.
That's
So I guess
correct.
the work has gotten bigger every year.
The level of activity has
Okay.
been higher.
We have discussed with Josie's group
Okay.
some better rules around that reserve, and including capping the reserve.
On the, yours is another division where from time to time it shows up that we're having trouble staffing up. Are we solving that problem?
Through the chair, the hires in 2018 exceeded our hires in 2017, and our exits in 2018 were less than our exits in 2017. So those two are positive signs. I would say that the demographic of the department is such that we probably are peaking in terms of retirements.
I know, I don't understand what any of your planners say anymore. I'm too old.
We are, as the deputy city manager indicated, in a high demand series of disciplines, whether it be.
But you're confident you can meet your staffing levels?
Sorry?
You're confident you can meet your projected staffing levels?
Yes,
with the
we've got
machinery you've got?
about 45 active requisitions underway, so we're pretty busy on the hiring front.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not saying it will be without its challenges, given the demand of the disciplines that we're in.
Thanks very much.
Okay, committee members, Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. To our chief planner, this is on the Appendix 3, the 2019 service levels. It is great to see the proposal to help us out with Committee of Adjustment applications. I think the proposal that's put forward makes a lot of sense, and because we're not meeting the target. Well, we've got 75% within 60 days. Now, the question is, I'd like to drill down a little bit more and find other places we may be able to make up some of that ground. Heritage in particular. So applications for designating and listing properties, how long is the queue as it stands?
I don't have a specific answer to that. It's a significant amount of time.
Again, the hundreds?
Likely, yes.
In the thousands?
I don't know about thousands, but.
And where's the HCD queue at? Where, in the dozens?
The HCD queue is perhaps, I've got a list of maybe a couple of dozen in front of me, and there are many that are ongoing, many that are projected to commence in this year, and you'll recall that the HCD process is through 2 steps. You do a study and then a plan. So like a conveyor belt, we've got a number underway, moving through both the study and plan phase of the work.
So you can do how many a year?
Projecting at any one time around 7 or 8. Again, they are in various states of doneness through both the study and plan phase.
And so we added some, did we add some planners to your division a couple of years back?
Yes, the purpose. In fact, we've just also added another staff member to Heritage who started just this month working on HCD plans.
So how many were we doing annually, say, 4 years ago, at the turn of the last council?
All I can say is I believe less. We have tried to pay attention to that direction and increase our capacity to undertake these studies.
So with a couple dozen in the queue, let's call that 24, it's going to take 3 or 4 years to get those off the ground.
Yes, the ones that I'm looking at right now in the couple of dozen are out into 2020, 2021 to get these pieces of work done. And again, they're in various states of doneness.
And how many listing or designated properties would we review on an annual basis?
I'm sorry, I don't have that number with me. I can get you that number offline.
Okay, I think that would be helpful because I think you're going to have a briefing note in your future about how we might eliminate that backlog to help move things forward. On another point, the addition of a staff member around the Exhibition Place Master Plan, I think, is a really important step. And thank you for putting that in specifically because there's a great need and it's right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm saying it's a good thing.
Councilor Nunziata.
On the Heritage District program, so 2 years ago, we were told by the chief planner that she needed additional planners to complete and to study some of the districts that have been in the queue for a number of years. For example, I'm going to give you Weston, and we approved that budget, and I don't even see that even on your list. So I don't understand why we're told 1 year that you need additional planners to do a project, and then 2 years later, it's not even on the list. You've taken it off the list.
So through the chair,
So, I don't know what's going on here.
if you can just provide a general comment through the chair. Last January 2018, City Planning produced a report through PGM that summarized the state of the situation with heritage studies and offered up the roadmap for future HCDs and prioritization of the work associated with heritage. I'm quite prepared to come back to Planning and Housing Committee this spring with an update of our progress on both the status of the HCDs and our designations. I can tell you that Weston, for example, on the study phase is planned to commence this year. And
Well, how come I don't see it here in the briefing note?
Well, I'm just referring to some more updated information. As we gotten into the year, we're trying to be as current as we can be, given that we've got some new staff now online in our projections. But again,
So this is
happy
not
to come back.
This report is not accurate. Oh, geez. Ah. Cockroach.
No, she didn't get it either. I think I got it. There he is.
Where is he?
I don't know what she's referring to.
I'll see you, Jennifer. You have it.
What is it, a mouse? Is it a cockroach?
I was
That's how the city gets things done.
I'm starting to scratch myself now.
Okay, Councillor, you can continue.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just, sorry, through the chair.
Are you telling me then this list is not the updated list? I mean, you know, like
Councillor, can you advise me of which page you're looking at in the notes?
page 20. Page 21 of 42 in the briefing budget notes? I don't know, maybe it's somewhere else, I don't know.
No, again, I would just updated you on Weston specifically, but these are other pieces of studies that are underway. So there's a more complete list.
Oh,
This
so
is
there's
just an
another
example of these are shown as examples. Again, our service standard for HCDs is 5 a year, and we completed 4 last year. So we are trying to improve our performance and meet the service standard that we've set for ourselves.
Okay,
the budget.
I just, as long as it's on that list that you don't have here, because as you know, they received provincial funding a few years ago, and if they don't spend it, they have to give it back. So we need to proceed with that one. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Did you have my time on while we were killing the cockroach?
No, I put it on pause. Don't you worry. Any other questions on planning? Okay, next will be Waterfront Revitalization Initiative, capital only. Waterfront Revitalization Initiative, just capital only. Okay, we'll go into committee. Councillor McKelvey.
So I just had a question about unfunded projects and where those would appear, because it looks like in the tables here are just the funded projects. I don't know if anybody's here to answer.
Through the chair, the unfunded projects.
Right here.
Hi, okay.
David Stonehouse is the Director for the Waterfront Secretariat and City Planning.
So if you look at page 13 and page 14 of the budget notes, you'll see some text on unfunded needs.
Okay, so and so maybe this is really what my question is, and maybe it doesn't fall under this budget item, but where would the Scarborough Waterfront project extension, that's 170 million, where is that bucketed in the budget then?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be through the Toronto Region Conservation Authority.
So we'll see it on their budget. And how do they interface then on that project with this? Because I know on the front page here, it was boasted about one of the projects, right here, so added to Toronto's inventory as shoreline space with the Port Union Waterfront Park. So that's why I was just wondering why this one's on here and the other one's not.
So generally speaking, our work is focused on the central waterfront, and we did 2 projects a number of years ago, one in Etobicoke, one in Scarborough, but largely we're focused on the central waterfront with TRCA, Parks, Forestry and Recreation, Transportation, and Water involved in other projects in the waterfront areas east and west of the downtown.
Okay, so that just wasn't the norm that some of these other projects weren't here. But going forward, we'll see them through the TRCA budget instead. Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, we'll go on now to engineering and construction services. Any questions? I think we're good on, maybe not. Councillor Carroll?
Just a quick one. It's my usual question. I had really no issues in this. Just following on the coordination question that I asked of the deputy city manager, we're ticking along on basement flooding mitigation projects. I see another 54 million going into basement flooding projects. Are those, is that spread out amongst a number of small projects, or is it 1 or 2 major ones?
Through the chair, for 2019, we have a number of neighborhoods, if you will, where basement flooding projects are planned. We awarded a number of contracts last year. We're in the throes of preparing a few tenders for this year as well. So the work in terms of construction this year is in the neighborhoods, not too dissimilar to what you experienced in your own ward.
But is it a number? Is it a cluster of projects or one or two big ones?
Through the chair, there's a number of neighborhood-related, I'll say smaller projects, nothing of the larger size. Those are in the design phase. What is in play for 2019 in terms of construction is the more routine neighborhood-type projects.
So we still have over the years $1 billion plus going into this program overall to meet all the study areas. We're still keeping to the metric of you, as that year approaches, you look at, you're still using the metric of greatest number of homes benefiting?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Just to give you more details on your previous question, the briefing notes for the basement flooding program were distributed today. So you will see the projects listed, and you will see them more, which projects will be proceeding in 2019 by ward and by councillors. So they're in the supplementary information. So all the details are there. So that'll answer your specific questions on where the work is occurring over the next few years. With respect to the criteria,
to read them during that boring Super Bowl.
I did last night. With respect to your question on how we program the work, yes, we are still following the council-approved policy, where once we complete an environmental assessment, any projects that are directly related to sanitary sewers immediately proceed into the capital program. If they're storm-related and less than 32,000 per benefiting household, and they take care of a large number of homes, they also proceed into the capital program immediately. If they're over that 32 cap, then they get put on the deferred list. Then you will also see in the briefing notes those projects that are on the deferred list.
Okay, and is that then being flagged for other divisions? We're going in and ripping up sewers. Everyone else rip up this neighborhood at the same time.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. Once we put the capital projects in the queue with our major capital infrastructure coordination team, they will put that on our system and show that we have a planned basement flooding project. And it then works through the design phases. So that's when it goes over to engineering construction services, and we try to coordinate with not only transportation, but other utilities as well. So Toronto Hydro, or if there's work to be done by Enbridge Gas, they will be able to see that project coming 3 or 4 years out as it works its way to tendering.
3 or 4 years in advance?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go on. Oh, sorry, Councillor Layton, you had questions.
Just one very quick question. I'm just curious, and this isn't a criticism, so please don't take us as one. A number of the new positions are in senior communications roles. Is like that seems to be what we found is there a specific reason for that, or is that not the case?
Through the chair, there was a budget ask last year for 2 additional positions on the communications and issues management support. One was directed to the local roads program, as you can appreciate the number of calls that we typically get for that, and then the other was to support the basement flooding program. Those are positions last year.
So those ones were already implemented.
Already implemented and filled.
Yeah.
So
okay.
working this year.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So next, fire services. Councillor Carroll.
Just a quick question. Oh, hello. So fire services, I see us sticking to the same position count as we go through the years of budgets, but we still keep coming in actuals. We're just under that. With the actuals the budget is always whatever 1,212. We always come in under that 200. So Have the positions been reviewed? Are we keeping to that number of the what is it, 7,212? I lost my internet for a second here. No, 3,212. Are we hanging on to those 12 positions plus, even though the actuals are coming in under, because of a new fire hall, or just hanging on to them because the gapping review hasn't been done?
Through the chair, it's gapping and a perpetual vacancy count, Councillor. We have a tough time. We continuously and right now are going through a very high, a period of very high attrition and turnover, and there's a cap or a limit to the number of people we can put through the Toronto Fire Academy at any given point in time. So we generally are running a slight vacancy count across the year or through the year.
Okay. And then do you have new fire halls coming or renovating fire halls coming in 2020 and 2021? You have Downsview and Woodbine coming on stream?
Through the chair, that's correct. Those are both new fire stations.
Those are both new. So is the plan would it be possible to use this gapping, or are you going to present with additional staff? Or are we going to once again try and spread the trucks and firefighters even thinner as we open new fire halls? What's the multi-year plan?
So through the chair, we were actually approved to add the crew for the Downsview Fire Station in the 2018 budget. As a result of a delay in the construction of that station, we made the decision to defer or delay the implementation of that crew. So that crew, which is a new additional crew for Downsview, is scheduled to commence, I think it's October 1st of 2019, and then there is forecasted a subsequent additional crew to open Woodbine in 2021.
Okay, and do each of those get their very own brand new trucks, or are we going to take a truck from somewhere else?
Through the chair, the allocation of the physical trucks, so not necessarily the people, the trucks depend on, we really look at the need overall, and the best example I can give you is in North York, in what we call North Command, the North Quadrant of the city, we've identified a need for a specialized high-rise response apparatus. So we make those decisions.
I think I resemble that remark, yes.
At the place in time, or at the point in time. Quite likely they will be new trucks, but I just wouldn't forecast yet exactly what that type is. It depends on what the analytics shows then.
So in that case, the truck for Downsview, for instance, would show as coming from somewhere else, but you would get a new high-rise truck for in the high-rise corridor.
Through the chair, that's correct. So the actual distribution of the trucks and crews is fluid all the time. So if you look at the map of the City of Toronto as we sit in this room, those trucks and crews are moving throughout the city as we talk. So they're perpetually being moved. That's part of the dynamic staging program. It is also not uncommon for us. In fact, right now we're in the early stages or the middle of a comprehensive review in North that looks at whether there are opportunities for us to optimize service coverage by repositioning existing trucks. So changing the physical location or their home location, not changing the delivery of any service level, not reducing or adding any resources, but simply optimizing the location of them. So that work goes on all the time. That it's going on now. There's actually 2 initiatives scheduled in 2019, deep analytics assessments on some, I won't bore you with the details, but some intricate parts of our operation that we need to look at in 19 to make informed decisions.
Oh, so we'll see those by 2020 budget?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, you will.
That first hall would come on stream. Thank you.
Councillor, if I may, or through the chair, I should point out that one of the recommendations in the budget notes is for us to report back through Economic and Community Development Committee in this year that looks at, and we'll have the opportunity to report and explain some of the intricacies and some of the opportunities to optimize our service coverage across the city.
Thanks, Councillor. Next, we'll go to MLS, Municipal Licensing and Standards. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you. There was a significant underspending in salaries and benefits last year. Can you explain why that's the case?
So through you, Mr. Chair, similarly, we always have a significant volume of vacancies in our MSO ranks. It took us longer again this year, 2018, to hire. That we have brought on a class of, I think, 26 just a couple of months ago. So that is as a result of the timing to hire at a large volume for our division.
So it was a recruitment issue. Is there anything being done to ensure that we don't end up in this position again?
Yes. So through you, Mr. Chair, what we've done is move to more of a perpetual posting, and we're going to look at bringing on smaller cadres of people more frequently through the year. So again, that takes, we're taking some different initiatives as far as aligning the training opportunities for the staff as well to make sure that we can be hiring people more frequently and keep the seats filled.
So the current number of enforcement officers is what, and what will we see it be next year before the increase of what's being proposed here?
Let me have a look.
I believe the number is 285 officers, and I think there are 10 vacancies right now, and then there's always the constant churn with retirements or people going to other municipalities. So the intent is to, with the perpetual posting, to keep, as Ms. Cook says, to keep those bums in seats.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, I did find the sheet. So we are at 235 approved positions, total enforcement bodies. I'm happy to tell you where they are if you like to be granular.
Yeah.
After the.
This would be interesting. I've never heard this before.
I think we went through this a couple of years ago.
Did we? Well, I forgot.
Okay. So from enforcement perspective, approved positions and investigation services, approximately 121. In our public spaces team under our bylaw enforcement group is 29. In our licensing, BLE licensing group is about 62. In our animal services emergency mobile response team is about 12. So that brings us to 235. There is an ask in this year's budget, which brings us up to 251.
And that ask is for the cannabis-related.
That is correct. There was additional base change and incremental enforcement staff to deal with the increased volume of PTC rides as well.
So the 12 animal services staff, they enforce the off-leash bylaw?
No. Through you, Mr. Chair, actually, I'm going to allow our interim executive director of MLS to answer that question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the 12 officers enforce not the off-leash in parks, off-leash outside of parks. So they're doing that throughout the city.
Okay. And there, within your, within the briefing notes, you talk about the removal of animals, but those are deceased animals, right? There's a whole section on it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the removal of animals could be dead or they could be injured.
Or injured. When they're injured, where do we take them? To the Wildlife Center?
Through you, Mr. Chair, depending on whether they're domestic or wildlife. The wildlife, in most cases, it's distemper and they're euthanized. If they're domestic animals, we take them to veterinarian hospitals.
Okay, so we don't transport to the Wildlife Center?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we do, on some animals that have the likelihood to survive.
And do we investigate animal cruelty?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do some animal cruelty. Certainly, we don't enforce the OSPCA Act. We don't have the authority to do so. We will refer to the OSPCA.
Who does enforce animal cruelty under the OSPCA Act in the City of Toronto?
The OSPCA.
And do they currently have any investigative operations going on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, currently they have approximately 2 officers assigned to the City of Toronto.
Okay. Noise bylaw enforcement. So which team would do that? Your investigations or your public space? Investigations?
Through the chair to Councillor Layton. All 3 divisions may investigate a noise complaint. So for instance, an animal-related noise complaint would be possibly investigated by Toronto Animal Services. If it's noise coming from a private property, investigation services would do the investigation. And if it's noise coming from a licensed establishment, then our bylaw enforcement unit would do
Now, in this section where you say there's a certain percentage that are, I think it was 75 or 85% are addressed within 30 days. Can addressed mean you attended the site but there was no noise, so it came off your list?
Through the chair, so when we respond to a noise complaint, Our goal, of course, is to get there as fast as we can, but unfortunately, some of the noise issues we deal with will occur when we don't have officers on duty. But our target, our service standard is we respond to 80% of the complaints within 5 business.
So when do you not have officers on duty?
It's your last question.
That's a bit of a difficult, I'll try and answer as succinctly as I can.
Sure.
So investigation services that do noise complaints on private property, our officers work in from 6 a.m. till 7 p.m. Monday to Fridays, and then we have weekend shifts during the day. Our bylaw enforcement unit has a bit more of a complex shift, which I'll turn to my colleague for.
Bylaw enforcement has 7 days a week operation from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. And then that increases from 6 a.m. to 3 a.m. during the summer months for Friday and Saturdays.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata.
Yes, a few questions. So with the staffing for the enforcement of the cannabis, some of that funding will be coming from the province, correct? Do we know how much?
Yes. The initial funding that we received from the province was a total of $3 million, was the first funding amount provided to the city, but that included not just municipal licensing and standards, that was court services as well, and legal services were part of the ask we put in for funding, or we've identified for using of some of that funding.
So we're not going to get more than $3 million?
Then there will be a second round of funding coming in March from the province that will be at least equal to that amount, if not greater, because it was based upon the number of municipalities that opt in.
For the enforcement?
Yes.
Yeah. So getting back to the noise complaints, so if we get a complaint late at night on an after-hours club or bar, and so they contact the police, and the police are asking them to call the city, correct?
Through the chair.
So, you know, because we don't have officers out at 2 or 3 in the morning with these after-hours bars.
So, through the chair, so non-police related calls, that being noise issues, are being directed to the city for the appropriate response and utilizing the appropriate resources we have. If it's an establishment, as you described, where it's a recurring event, then we will set and organize a proper investigation of that illegal nightclub. It's because it's not a one-time event. It's those illegal nightclubs or booze cans are recurrent. So we would coordinate with our other enforcement partners to do a coordinated enforcement action there, not just MLS responding to the noise issue.
And so that's in partnership with the police, the same as some of the Airbnbs that we have that are causing problems.
That's correct. And other enforcement agencies, including Toronto Fire Service as well for fire code.
So we at one time had a committee on liquor licensing. Councillor Layton, you were part of it, Councillor Per. So what's happening to that committee? Should we not be meeting? Because it seems like the problems have escalated in the last couple of years. Who should I ask?
I'll start and Tracy can finish. The liquor licensing, I believe, was a task force. It had a terms of reference for 2 years. Those 2 years completed probably 2 years ago. It was in the first 2 years of last term. So the committee does not exist. We continue to work with our colleagues in AGCO, partnering on a number of initiatives with bylaw enforcement as well.
So what have you, so do we get I don't know why we can't, why it was only for 2 years. I think we should have extended that because there are some issues. So any updates in any of the dialogue that you've had with the AGCO, like do we not get a copy of that report? Because there's really serious issues out there, and I don't think we're able to address them. Not that it has anything to do with your budget, but actually it does, because we're getting a lot of complaints, and you're sending out your resources out at 3, 4 in the morning on some of these after-hours clubs that we're having problems with. So that's costing us money as far as enforcement.
So through you, Mr. Chair, as Carlton mentioned, we do have ongoing meetings with the AGCO. That is heightened again since the AGCO now has responsibility for the licensing of the cannabis retail storefronts. So certainly, if we'll have a look at where we left off and what is it of your concern that's not being addressed. I know this has been a bit of a complex issue. That was a term of reference for that committee as a task force. That doesn't mean that the work doesn't continue. So we can certainly have a look at what issues are still unresolved and make sure that dialogue continues and look to report back through the General Government and Licensing Committee at an appropriate time on the update.
Yeah, and so I know Councillor Layton and Councillor Perks has an interest in that as well. The last year we at licensing we licensed apartments and that was approved. What was the total revenue on that? Do we have the total revenue?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, just to be clear, we're not licensing the apartments. They are required to register with us.
Yeah, but there's a fee to that, right?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
And I'm just
through the chair to Councillor Nunziata. There's approximately just over 3,500 apartment buildings that fall under that program that required to register, and the revenues on that was just 2.4 million, just over 2.4 million.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. Next is PPF and A, Policy Planning, Finance, and Administration. Seeing none. Next will be Toronto Building. Councillor Perks, was that a hand? Okay, Councillor Perks.
I'm very sorry. I'm trying to track about a lot of different stuff here. I'm going from memory, but my memory is that when I read the analyst note, it struck me that there was a serious problem with us having enough staff to manage the workload. Am I remembering that right? Like the number for the applications we got in.
Through the chair, in our budget we have added additional resources to Toronto Building on a temporary basis, and they're plan review type positions to help us with our review of work. What we have found in the past is that we've been able to manage our workload and meet our KPIs, our targets on that. However, there was a cost of doing that, and it was done a lot through overtime. So while we go through a program review to look at our program and the way we deliver our services, we've added 10 additional resources into Toronto Building to help us with that work so that we're not always relying on overtime to achieve that goal.
Okay. So I'm noticing that even with that, I'm looking now at Appendix 3, which are the service levels. And I've got to say, like, I was surprised. So to get a zoning certificate review for a small building within the 15 days, we're only projecting we can do that about 55–60% of the time. Like I see some of the, like, so this is Appendix 3, page 24. Like I was looking at some of the service standards and I saw numbers like that in a few places within Toronto buildings, and they're just a lot lower than the frequency with which we meet our targets for like plan review out of the planning department. These are very low.
Okay.
And that's our goal, even with the new staff?
Through the chair, that target has stayed around the same for the last number of years, so it's around 60 to 65%. And there, you're talking about the zoning certificates and the preliminary plan review, which is on zoning. That we are meeting that target with the staff that we have. That whole program is something that's under review right now, and hopefully that we can improve it through streamlining the way we carry out those reviews.
Okay. That's all for me.
Thanks, Councillor. Any other questions on this division? Councillor Carroll.
I do note, however, just to give you a chance to to shine, we seem to be having lower targets in review, but in service levels, in terms of responding when people are calling to say they need an inspection of a site, or there's an issue of non-compliance, those are getting there right away. 98% of the time, 95% of the time. Building inspections, investigations would be where we've sent people because we've called for people to come because we can't believe they've been inspected, sort of scenarios. Those are all happening in the allotted, usually it's 2 days time frame.
Through the chair, those targets we are meeting on a regular basis.
So given that this is a cost recovery department, does it not mean that we're focused on meeting the demand 95% of the time in terms of inspecting once they're done, but the review to get a development off the ground and on its way that is required from building, from the very people who are paying for your division, that's the thing that's being kept waiting. Is there, and 60% is our goal in 2019. Will we be seeing a plan back? There's some modernization going on there. When we see a plan back, could these review types of service levels, could we go after a higher target?
Through the chair, that is our goal through our program review. What I would say is it gets complicated doing those plan reviews for the permit where we're checking them for compliance. What often happens is, and this is what affects the targets a lot of time, there's prescribed times that we need to meet those targets. However, often what happens is the submissions are incomplete, or we're waiting for additional information from the applicant, and that can slow down the review time. As part of our program review, we want to look at our efficiency in the way we carry out that service, and as a result of that, that could improve, or I'm hopeful that will improve those targets as well.
Right, so if we're going back to do these service levels again, could that be articulated in there in some way? I know we want to keep them simple, but so that service levels indicated some sort of, and I only ask because it's a cost recovery type of department, could we get to the point where the commitment is, if you meet your responses needed, we will meet ours 80% of the time, such that the service level was really geared to, if you pay your fee, we'll and respond to every one of our requests. This will be our new metric. So that we have a community who is paying for your department, paying a higher fee, but being quite happy to do it because they're getting their service faster.
Through the chair, I would say that is the goal of the program review, so we're hopeful to get there.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Nunziata.
Just to follow up on that, that you commented to Councillor Carroll's question is that sometimes the delay is that you're waiting for additional information from the applicant. So do you not meet with the planning department, all the departments are involved, and you let the applicant know from day one what information you need, or does it keep going back and forth by emails and nobody, and which I find that I'm getting complaints of frustration because they're not told they need additional information, and that's why the delays.
Through the chair, the process that we follow as far as when submissions come in for building permits, so those submissions come in, our plan reviewers review those submissions for compliance with the applicable regulations and send out their deficiency notes if they can't issue the permit with what the additional requests are. What I would say, quite frankly, is we probably could do a better job, or there's more opportunity for us to improve the way we deliver that service from the perspective of getting more clear around what are our expectations. Often what I find as regulators, we do a good job of knowing what's required, but sometimes there's some opportunities to get more clear what the expectations are from the industry who's submitting them. So part of this program review would be looking at ways to strengthen the way we do that.
And that would speed up the process. So what is this? I've read in here, but a working group that you're going to establish, an interdivisional working group? And what would that working group do?
Through the chair, I believe the interdivisional working group that you're talking about is part of our residential infill strategy. So part of our residential infill strategy, what the whole purpose is look for opportunities to improve the negative impacts, I would say, of residential infill in established neighborhoods. What we put together is an interdivisional group that comes together on a regular basis, and that group is looking for strategies to better improve the way we respond to those issues in a more collaborative way and dealing with it in a much more efficient way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next, we'll go to Toronto Building. Oh, sorry, I got to mark that off. Let's try Transportation Services. No questions? Okay, next. There's nothing on your page, is there, Councillor Perks, is there?
Yeah, I've got notes on this one.
Okay.
Oh, I like that laugh of yours, Mr. Chair. So, diving right in. So we got the overview presentation of the whole division in terms of how we're doing all this great work in terms of capital. Could you tell me, if I'm understanding this correctly, if you take the gardener out of the transportation capital project, our state of good repair backlog basically triples. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct, Councillor.
Okay, and there were some real shockers in here for me. Bridge, could you tell me the story? Like, no, actually, I won't go there because I don't have enough time for that one. Going to page 34, which is the unmet capital needs piece, I see that of the $69 million that you asked for in terms of cycling infrastructure, this budget, this budget's $69 million short in terms of what you asked for cycling infrastructure? That's sort of like table 8, unmet capital needs, like 7 or 8 lines down?
Through the chair, that's correct, Councillor. We currently include $94.2 million in the 10-year capital plan, which is in addition to the $41 million from the PTIF program directed specifically at cycling.
And there's $69 million that you asked for that is unfunded?
That's correct.
Okay. What is that? Like, what kind of stuff?
Through the chair, there's a range of projects included in that, which we are going to be reporting to Council in more detail on in the report on the cycling network plan update later this year.
Okay, well, I vote on the budget in March. Could you give me a sense before I vote on the budget of what that $69 million is?
Through the Speaker, it's not a specific, through the Chair, excuse me, and not a specific list of projects because we're currently re-cash flowing given the influx of funds that came from the federal government through the PTIF program and from the provincial government through the Ontario Municipal Commuter Cycling Fund. Right now, I can say that for the 2019 budget, there isn't an unfunded amount in the 2019 budget.
I know.
Unfunded amounts start for the following year.
I'm trying to understand because we're making certain choices in terms of our long-term financial planning about how much money we're putting aside for capital and how much money we're putting in for capital from current that are having an impact on our capital plan down the road. Uh-oh, I said road. And I'm trying to understand, given the affordability targets provided by the city in the 10-year capital plan, you've said you're going to be about 70 million short for what you'd like to do in the next 10 years. Can you, in very general terms, tell me what kind of stuff that is?
Through the Chair, there are a range of major corridor studies that Council asked for future consideration, which will be reported on in the report I mentioned to Council later this year, and a range of cycle tracks and bike lanes and trails projects throughout the term of the 10-year capital plan.
So studies, cycle tracks, trails, that kind of stuff. Okay, thank you. Going a little bit forward, continuing along the theme of unmet capital needs on page 44. Am I correct if I'm reading just above where it says the word Eglinton Connects? that this budget is short $187.5 million in terms of what we would have to do to build the smart track stations.
Through the chair, the $187.5 million is the unmet capital needs in relation to the St. Clair Transportation Master Plan, so not specifically the smart track stations, it's for the new road infrastructure, which forms part of the TMP for St. Clair.
But it says in the bullet just above it that it's the St. Clair TMP improvements with the smart track station. So would we be able to deliver the St. Clair station without that money? Okay, well, maybe I'll get that as a briefing note another time. That's my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Take it into committee. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It looks like on page 33 of the budget notes, it talks about historically from 2012 to 2017, transportation services had an average annual spending rate of 61%. And that last year that was 63%, and so, which is slightly above. So I'm just wondering, it seems like this is something that happens year over year, and if this trend continued, this year it would be 176 million underspend. And so are we, I mean, obviously your goal at the beginning of the year is to be 100% spent, but if we're continually not reaching that, is there thoughts that this 176 million, for example, this year, should we have backup plans on how to advance other projects or deploy that to other projects?
So through the chair, certainly we've had a challenge over the last number of years in terms of carryover dollars on the capital. We've done a fair amount of work to cash flow our capital works over the few years, and so we've actually come in with less carry forward in order to address the fact that some of the projects, either through tendering or through coordination or because they needed to match up with other projects, gotten bumped to another year. So instead of continuing to carry forward the full amount, we've tried to cash flow it throughout the term of the 10-year program. So yes, our goal is to get to 100% spend, and we're doing another deep dive this year to figure out where the challenges are related to that.
So what measures are being taken then this year to improve, for example, contract management so that we can deliver on what's here? Because I'm worried about continually over-promising and under-delivering. So what are you changing fundamentally about your contract management to help with that?
Through the chair, so we've actually reorganized our entire division in 2018, and we're in the process of completing that reorganization, including moving all of our project management related to capital delivery under one director, and coming up with a number of strategies to ensure that we have stewardship of those projects all the way from the inception in the capital program all the way through delivery. Typically, our delivery is through our partners in ECS, 9 times out of 10, and so working with them to ensure that we have early information about issues related to delivery, but also so that the projects are being scoped early and we're managing them in such a way that we can get the public engagement done early enough that we don't have surprises along the way, which has been part of the challenge as to why some of these projects have bumped out year over year.
So I appreciate that, you know, when you're building infrastructure, there's hidden surprises, especially with state of good repair and different things like that. And what you thought was the case may not be so. But is there almost like a B list of projects that are simpler that you could advance in any given year as other projects are behind? Like, is there anything ever from 2020, for example, that we know could be accelerated into the Q3, Q4 of 2019?
Through the chair, so we have that conversation on the regular with our colleagues in ECS, because it takes a fair amount of design dollars to get a project ready to go to tender. We do our best within the year. We have a coordination meeting every month where we look through the projects of the following year to see where we can better streamline and make sure that we're moving our delivery forward. It is not always as easy, and quite frankly, there's not a lot of low-hanging fruit. One of the things we did with regard to delivery is we transferred our local roads paving project over to ECS in 2018, I believe was the beginning of that, in 17. But we've also looked at that now over a 3-year timeframe, so we're really trying to get more projects in design early on so that we can tender over a timeframe where we have some more predictability. So we are working through a number of those issues and will continue to do so.
And then my last question is, for example, you have on page 22 table for the summary of capital projects by category. And while I think it's great that we're looking at this as a budgetary point of view in terms of dollars, I'm personally more interested in schedule and in terms of years. And is there a thought that going forward, instead of just reporting on money, we could actually report on schedule? Because again, I am worried about communities get very frustrated when they think a project is happening and it's not, but what can we do to look at things in terms of schedule, not just dollars?
Through the chair, certainly when you look at the summary of capital projects by category that you've identified, the year that the funds are in, there is background information that we have on the project planning and delivery planning side around whether those funds are allocated to design, property acquisition, or construction costs. And so on a project by project basis, we have that information and share that with councillors and the public as it's available, particularly for those major growth projects, probably like some of the ones you're thinking of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Carroll.
Yes. I heard you say that local roads have been moved over directly to engineering?
Through the chair, delivery of the local roads program is now done by engineering and construction services. Delivery of the program, so development of the...
So it's the prioritization and
still happens.
Development of the calendar, that still happens in
Yes, it does.
transportation.
Yes, it does.
So when we see local and major roads rehabilitation, $3 billion worth of unfunded in the big general presentation, getting those into a plan, getting that scheduled, that comes down to Transportation's capital planning division?
That's correct.
So is there a similar sort of metric do we have an up-to-date index of what needs to be done? If these are unmet, $3 billion worth of unmet, should we just say we're not doing roads anymore and I can't tell you when our road is done? Or are we still, even though we're up to $3 billion that are unfunded, we still have them prioritized? If we have the funds, this is where we'll go.
Through the chair, in 2018, we undertook a pavement condition index exercise of every kilometer of road in the city. So we do have very good information about condition of our assets. And what we're doing now is looking at how to prioritize that in the most cost-efficient way possible, as well as working with our delivery partners about how to increase the capacity to get more road kilometers built or rehabilitated in any given year.
Okay, and Councillor McKelvey asked you about capital not completed year over year. In fact, 100% is not your target. We're coming back from the deep. What is your hope for 2019? What percentage of capital do you expect to get spent? What's your goal? It's not 100%, is it?
So through the chair, no, it's not 100%. One thing which is really important to note is that there are large elements of delivery of the programme which are outside of our control. Through the MCIC capital coordination process, transportation is, by its very nature of the work, often last in to the road. So the timing of our works is often dependent on the work of others. That can often result in our work getting bumped. Our delivery rate, I'd like to pick up on our delivery rate because our delivery rate has been consistently improving year on year. So 2018, for example, if we take out the PTIF work and the gardener, so work which is outside of our control, our delivery rate is almost 76%. So given there are large elements of the programme which are outside of our control, that's actually, historically, that's probably one of the best delivery rates we've ever achieved. I'd also set that also in the context of, that includes the additional $22 million which Council gave us only in July Council to put towards the road safety plan and acceleration of that. So even with a late influx of an additional $22 million, we've still achieved that high delivery rate for 2018.
And do we still have, I need a quick answer to this one because I still have a service level question. Do we still have the practice for you that if a significant number of projects that we're adopting today are bumped, the List A, List B process, if some of these are bumped, you can pull forward some that would have been in future years that don't present engineering difficulties? We still have that practice open to your division?
Through the chair, we do over-program to some extent what is in the local road rehabilitation program. And so there is an element of projects that can still move forward given some of the coordination pressures.
Excellent. Okay, so service levels. I spent a long time looking at the service levels to do with snow last week, which should come as no surprise. We spend a significant amount of time anywhere in the North York District and increasingly in Scarborough and Etobicoke because we've taken on windrow clearing there, dealing with residents who are upset because the windrow truck is not following along behind the plow and the windrow's being cleared, as was the whole reason for inventing that service. In the service levels, I now learn that there is a service level metric for plowing and a service level metric for windrows, and they're quite different. And so isn't it the case that we really ought to be communicating as a corporation that, no, the windrow truck is not coming today. It just isn't coming. So that 311 and every councillor's office was not actually answering this phone call over and over and over again? Very, very, very angry calls. And in fact, when I crack open the service level book, they have no hope of the windrow truck coming in the first day because it's not supposed to. Why do we not have a communication strategy around the fact that those two services have become de-linked through service levels?
Last question.
Through the chair, so I think that the goal and the results, especially in a storm like the one that we just had, the goal of getting the windrows cleared soon thereafter the plow service level happens. Very often that plow has to come through a number of times before those windrows get opened. And certainly the challenge with the storm like the one we just had, with lots of blowing snow and an increasing mounting height of windrows that then puts that back into the driveways, makes it equally challenging, which means that there's often lots of cleanup that has to happen after, even when the windrows do get opened, within an approximate time, even if the service level isn't aligned. And I would agree with you that the service levels that are in the budget are ones that, as we work through the next winter contract, which is coming up within the next few years, we really do need to do a deep dive and make sure that we've aligned those service levels.
But there is a financial cost attached to that, is there not? Because right now, we have a service level for plowing that is anywhere, depending on the storm, from 2 to 3 hours right up to 16 hours. And that's after the snow gets to that deep. But not until after the storm is over can we start the clock rolling that says 72 hours from now, someone will come by and clear your windrow. Having explained that to my residents, I have many of them saying, then what is the point? Who doesn't need their car for 3 entire days?
Through you, the windrow clearing is, we get lots of concerns and challenges around windrow clearing. Everything from the windrow clearance is not wide enough that it should be for the entire length of the frontage or the entire length of the driveway versus just the 3 meters, to the amount of time that it takes to get them cleared. The service is also not one, of course, that we offer citywide, and so the highest priority, and I think the service levels reflect this, is to get the roads cleared as quickly as we can and ensure that there's access.
Absolutely.
And so I hear what you're saying about the discrepancy between the service level time frame, and I think that certainly we could get. I could do a little bit of deeper dive with my my folks my snow removal folks to talk about what the discrepancy is between the timing, but they're going to focus on the roads and the sidewalks as highest priority.
Well, I would submit this is probably what their contract tells them to do.
Councillor Nunziata.
Just on that point, someone that's received hundreds of calls. So areas that don't have that service, well, even the areas that did have them, we never did do it. But the areas that don't have it, then what can we do for those residents that don't have that service and they're out there at 6 in the morning clearing their driveways, and then we come along and we throw the snow back into their driveways? So can we not help these poor residents that don't have that service, but yet they're being, plowed in by our contractor?
Well, through you, I mean, the bulk of the city does not have windrow clearance service. I mean, none of downtown does, and
No,
other
I know,
areas
and
as well.
not everyone in my area has it either.
Certainly, at a certain point.
Tobico has it, North York.
At a certain point, we do have senior clearing, and, solid waste helps us with that. We also have our own folks that if people have signed up, that there is assistance for people to help get them out from under the snow when they're seniors and need additional assistance, and that's what our service levels focus on.
Yeah, but other than the seniors, like, I think what's frustrating the residents, what I heard in the last storm, is that we went out there, we shoveled, and everything's fine, and then all of a sudden we're blocked in again. So that's what's frustrating for them. So some of them are even saying, don't even bother coming down the street, because we probably can get out a lot easier. So I don't know, maybe we have to look at that service, because, I mean, it's only because of this storm.
Starts with Francis.
Pardon?
That's when the cut comes to windrow clearing.
No.
Francis Nunziata, all right.
No, but I'm not saying, we never had that service. No, and I never had it in my ward either. No. Anyway. Yeah, mixed thing. Okay, let's just go on. So just on the Eglinton Connect, so that will be completed. Eglinton will be hopefully complete by 2021. And there's all this road, that's been dug up along Eglinton Avenue, probably all the way to the East End. So who is Metrolinx responsible for redoing all of Eglinton Avenue repaving, or does the city and then we charge Metrolinx? Because I see that you got some money in the budget here.
So through the chair, in broad terms, Metrolinx are responsible for reinstating the right-of-way where they've been actively working.
Well, it's all of Eglinton, though, the whole road.
So there are a number of locations where they're underground, and primarily their work is happening underground.
Yeah.
So the city is responsible for reinstating and sorting out the right-of-way in those sections.
The city is. So Metrolinx isn't responsible for, what's Metrolinx for?
The Metrolinx are responsible for reinstating the right-of-way where they've disturbed it. So in the locations where they're actively working, then they will need to.
Yeah, no, but other than around the stations, there's been a lot of damage from their trucks, other than the stations. So are they not responsible for that?
Through the chair, I don't believe so, no.
No? Oh. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Layton.
Sure, thank you very much. I'll start on the operating side. There's a comment on page 17. You know what? I'm going to ask first, I'm going to pick off where Councillor Nunziata was talking about winter maintenance. And I appreciate this was a particularly difficult storm, but these are the calls that we're getting on a pretty regular basis. One that snow removal on sidewalks adjacent city facilities, so first of all, the service levels, are those what we think we're achieving? Because it says 100% everywhere, and I can guarantee you 100% that we're not meeting several, and I can highlight them. But are those what we're achieving or what our contract says we should achieve?
So through the chair, our service levels for this, all local roads were to be completed within 24 to 36. I'm just picking that one because I have it handy, right?
If those are our service levels, then what are we actually achieving?
So we achieved 22 hours in this storm. Now that is not talking about service requests, and it's not talking about things we had to go back to do. But if you have a specific question about a particular, like a sidewalk clearing or...
So a sidewalk adjacent to city facility is supposed to be cleared by 13 hours? Is it under the 13-hour one, or is there a different thing? Sidewalk sanding, there's a 72 and a 13. There were sidewalks in Ward 11 that within 5 days, as of Sunday, still were impassable.
And through the chair, so in certain cases, if they were high-volume sidewalks versus low-volume sidewalks, the high-volume sidewalks, were they like on arterial roads?
Christie Street, adjacent Christie Pits, where the tobogganers were.
We hit, as far as I've been informed by my staff, we hit all of our service levels for each of the individual pieces, which does not mean that with all the blowing snow and the height of the snow, that we had a lot of service requests that we've been working through up till, I think, Thursday we'll be done with them. But we did 4 rounds on high-volume sidewalks plowing, where we have accessibility to plow, and 2 rounds on the low-volume sidewalks during the big part of the storm.
I would seriously argue that I don't, and trust me, I tried to defend the city on Twitter all weekend. But then when I tried to push my daughter's stroller up Christie, because I took the city side of the street, the park side, because the other side was too many private ownership, I had to physically pick it up and carry it on at least 5 occasions to get over what was a very solid snowbank. And so I'm not sure, like I think our targets are probably very correct, but in its actual implementation, I think we're way off. And so that brings me to the actual question.
Could I ask, just one more.
Sorry, sure.
I was just going to say that part of the other challenge that we face, and it was significant on the bike lanes this time as well as on sidewalks, is that because there's such a small amount of space, especially in downtown streets, a lot of times either private businesses, private property owners, or people digging out their cars will then also put snow back in places that have already been cleared. And so I know that certainly that was a situation in my neighborhood, and we saw that pretty frequently throughout the city, which doesn't mean that there wasn't issues with various locations. And you know, we're working through thousands of service requests, so certainly there are certain issues, but I just wanted to point that out.
Here's the point I was trying to make from that. As on page 17, it says that as a result of spending performance, you focused a line-by-line review and you decided to reduce the amount for winter maintenance by $1.59 million. So we're actually reducing the amount going and budgeted to winter maintenance based on us having say we're achieving the 100%, but us knowing that we're not.
Well, through the councilors, through the chair. So we did a 5-year look at our winter service levels in our budget, and the amount that we propose to reduce to hit our 0 target is well within, I mean, we underspend most years, and I think part of the challenge is the snow removal, which is, we did some limited snow removal in this storm and continue to do it. We're still out there doing some snow removal now, is where the significant amount of cost comes in. But in terms of the average spend on winter maintenance year over year for the last 5, we've had a significant amount of space in that budget, and that's why we took the $1 million reduction there.
But I worry though, then who and how do we trigger a snow removal? Because maybe that's the service standard we need to look at, is when do we start actually going out and digging out some of these areas that are just not passable by anyone, even with a high level of mobility.
And so, through the chair, so we have enacted snow removal as part of this snow response. We've been doing it in the priority areas, certainly in bus stops, in locations where there are no parked cars, which is part of the challenge. I've done a fair amount of looking at our friends in Montreal, and they do a lot of towing before they go out and do their snow removal, and they also rely heavily on snow removal. So we've been doing snow removal through this storm process, and we'll continue to do it it through till, I think Thursday is when there's anticipation. Now, it's not everywhere, that's absolutely true.
I think that's precisely what we need, what we should be doing more. I know we don't like putting more no parking restrictions out on our streets, but I would be quite happy to approve it on a number of locations that have high pedestrian traffic that just need to be cleared so that people can pass in a stroller or in a wheelchair or without mountain climbing equipment. Now, one more question is, what's your most comical service level? Because I think the one that's 60 days for removal of snow that's piled too high is actually probably the funniest one. It says clear within 60 days of snow piled too high on a boulevard. If there's a funnier one, I'd love to know. That one's pretty good though.
Thank you, Councillor.
60 days.
Okay, Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, just questions as it relates to snow clearing of bike lanes. I got a lot of questions about the timing of bike lane clearing versus sidewalk clearing, always contentious. Could we just talk about how that works, the contracts, the timing, how the equipment goes out on that?
Through the chair, so we have a conference call report in throughout the city with all of our snow removal experts, probably twice a day during most of the storms. And so the deployment of our snow removal on separated bike lanes and the trails that we look after, the salting of them and the plowing of them happens early on in most of these storms. In fact, we did 5 rounds this storm on Martin Goodman Trail, the Humber Bay Trail, and the separated bike lanes. I know from just traveling in a couple days that a lot of the again, it's not because the businesses and residences want to impact the bike lane. It's often because they don't have anywhere else to put the snow. And so we do have, especially in the downtown, a significant challenge with the storage capacity for snow. And so that's why it requires so many rounds. But those service levels are triggered very early on in the storm. I couldn't give you an exact time frame, but pretty early on in the storm.
Is there ever any is it a trade-off between plowing the sidewalk that the city is responsible for and plowing the bike lane, or are those two separate pieces of equipment and considerations?
So there's a different, through you, Chair, there's a different service level standard. So for high volume sidewalks, the service level is triggered at 2 centimeters of snow, and the bike lanes are triggered at 5 centimeters of snow. So it does happen with the high volume pedestrian sidewalks first. And then at 5 centimeters, it triggers the bike lanes and trails. Generally, we salt at the same time. So when we go out and do rounds of salting and we're expecting a storm, we're going to salt the bike lanes at the same time we salt the pedestrian ways.
For the plowing equipment, are those the same plows that we use for sidewalks that we use for bike lanes, or are those different pieces of equipment?
Through the chair, there is specialized equipment for cycle tracks, separated bike lanes in the core. Our staff have actually been recognized at international winter cycling forums for the ingenuity in the creation of that equipment, because the process of vehicles activating salt to melt ice is different because of the weight of vehicles than it is for bikes, which obviously don't have the same weight and volume on that salt. And so there's a machine that drags tires, small tires across the cycle tracks to help activate the salt, as an example.
So just to clarify, the plowing equipment that is award-winning and taking care of the bike lanes is not detracting from sidewalks being cleared. Those are separate pieces of equipment and different challenges.
Correct.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next is solid waste. So we have 2 more scheduled, solid waste and Toronto Water, and Councillor Perks to start with solid waste.
So I'm just trying to find, I've been asking all the different departments about the state of their capital. And I'm trying to find the right page for you. Your capital backlog. Do you have that in here? Wherever, oh, did a good return.
Oh, yeah, that was a lot of snow.
Page 20?
It's good.
So I noticed that your state of good repair backlog as a % of asset value is 0 right across the 10-year plan. Is that because you have a revenue source that isn't frozen at the rate of inflation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's as a result of financial planning in the reserves in order to fund capital projects moving forward.
Okay, it's okay. The budget chief got the point of my question.
I know you will. Councillor Carroll, take the committee.
Yes, I thank you for this. The per person equations on the bin was not included in the launch presentation, and so this is a welcome slide. But we had someone say to us, in terms of doing the rebate, that we have raised the small bin so much that there is now no incentive to having a small bin. And I can't do the math in my head because the numbers are all so awkward now. Are we still able to say that you will pay less per month for your waste?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. The smaller the bin, the less you pay.
Okay, and you can't have 2 small bins. If you have a large amount of waste, we require them to have 1 pay number on 1 bin.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. 1 bin per household.
Okay, and there was some work going on in my area, and indeed lots of Scarborough, where we think we may have rooming houses, but in areas where they are not legal. There was some work going on to monitor the waste there and enforce, do better at enforcing how they deal with their solid waste, such that while they may be illegal rooming houses, there was going to be some work done on if they need 2 bins, they would have 2 bins, just so that we didn't end up with waste in the wrong stream. I'm putting you on the spot, I know, because you're new, but is there any initiative along those lines?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's no specific initiative to look at illegal rooming houses. If they do come to our attention, we will work with MLS to make sure that they follow the city bylaws and the waste that they generate is properly source separated.
But in terms of if they got to the point of admitting that there were multiple people in the house and they needed an extra bin, currently they can't get it until we solve that issue.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we would work with MLS to resolve that issue as best as.
Oh, okay. Possibly even case by case, if it helped us keep the wrong things out of the wrong stream.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay. And Environment Days, we refresh my memory. We made a motion in council last week. Will we get a briefing note on what happens, what the financial impact is, or should we simply subtract the note that we got earlier about the, I think it was on purple, the cost of the change in delivery that was proposed in this budget, which is 25.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we can definitely provide a briefing note on that subject.
So we might need a briefing note. It is more complicated than just subtracting that amount that we saw on purple paper?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we can provide a briefing note if requested. It's not as complicated as was mentioned before.
Okay, thank you.
I'd put in the request. No, I said if you can, one of us should put in the request.
Well, maybe now's a good time to ask the process. You need all the briefing notes by Wednesday's session.
We'll be moving, so after Wednesday's session, we'll move all the briefing notes, but if you can get them to the clerk as early as possible so we can pull them all together.
Right.
We'll probably
Okay.
just do.
Censor them.
Hmm?
So you can censor them.
Not at all, not at all.
I'll see what I can do.
Okay, thanks. Any other, Councilor McKelvey?
Thank you. In reading through the materials that were provided, I was excited by the Dufferin facility site and the biogas generation. So I was wondering when that comes online and if you have ideas on how much revenue could be yielded through that facility.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we're hoping to have that online by 2020, in the first quarter of 2020. We're still working on our contractual obligations with Enbridge to really nail down the financial impacts of that, and once we have the contracts ready to go, we will update council.
Okay, and this question may be better served in the next line item on Toronto Water, but I'm wondering is the thought that this would become more widespread across the city, and for example, the Highland Creek treatment plant is being rebuilt, and is that a possibility for facilities like that as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we would focus on our solid waste facilities, and we're looking at implementing renewable natural gas at a number of our operations, and then leave Lou to discuss the Toronto Water strategy moving forward.
Sorry,
Sure. I'll let Lou speak to the Toronto Water aspects, but in terms of solid waste, we look to implement that across a number of our facilities moving forward.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. The funding we were to receive from the provincial government for that program, the gas program, what's happened to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, that was funding from Enbridge, and we're currently working with them to solidify the contract moving forward.
Sorry, wasn't there provincial funding coming from the municipal greenhouse gas program?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, there was some funding from the province for that project.
That's been cancelled?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
And what are we doing instead to move the project forward?
We have partnered with Enbridge to move forward on a model in order to capture the natural gas, turn it into renewable natural gas, and right now it looks like we'll have a net positive financial impact from that investment.
So why are they so keen to fund it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think they see the opportunities both from a financial perspective as well as environmental stewardship perspective to advance renewable natural gas in their system, as there are a lot of residents in Toronto that would like to use that, including the City of Toronto in our waste fleet.
Elsewhere in the budget, it talks about activities that were delayed due to insufficient staff resources in the bid documents. Can you just provide some clarity into why and what's going on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, there has been some slight delays working through purchasing. We have identified some of those roadblocks, and we're working actively to make sure that they are addressed moving forward in order to advance our capital projects and other projects expeditiously.
Can you describe what those delays are? I'm just wondering, is there anything we can do at this budget committee to help move that forward? Because you're not the only division where the RFP process slows us down a little bit. Not to say that folks aren't doing their job, they just may need resources to do it more effectively.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, Solid Waste has invested in the purchasing department by providing funds to hire dedicated buyers. I think that there's opportunity for us to work together with purchasing to move capital projects forward. What I've instructed my staff to do just recently was to develop a multi-year procurement plan in order for us to be able to smooth out our procurements in order to balance our resources with our needs. I can definitely go offline and speak to the purchasing department to see if they have some initiatives to help other departments as well and bring that to council.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, just to add to that, we do have an active modernization program looking at supply chain specifically, which will hope to address some of these concerns as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions on solid waste? Seeing none. Next, Toronto Water. Councillor Perks, do you have any questions?
Hi, Lou, I noticed that your backlog as a percentage of asset value drops from about 2 or 3% down to 0, or 5% down to 0. When was the last time you brought in a water rate increase that was at or below the rate of inflation?
This is the first one that it's at or close to the rate of inflation.
No, at or below. When was the last time you did that? 15 years?
I haven't. No, my career I haven't. No.
In your career, you haven't. Would you say there's a relationship between being able to maintain your capital assets in a state of good repair and having the freedom to bring in the revenues necessary to do that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's important to identify the amount of funding you need to have a proper replacement rate for state of good repair, which is what we did for Toronto Water.
That's very helpful, Mr. DiGeronimo. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee members. We'll start with Councillor McKelvey, then go to Layton.
Same question that I raised before. What are the plans for, or are there any plans for biomass associated with wastewater treatment? And is there a revenue stream that we should be exploring through this, especially with the new projects like the Highland Creek treatment plant?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we generate digester gas, which is composed significantly of methane at our wastewater treatment plants, and we use it for different purposes. So at the Humber treatment plant, for example, we recapture the methane and we use it to run a cogeneration facility where we do generate electricity to offset our electricity demands. So that system's in place and used by Toronto Water. At Ash Bridges plant, where we have a very large digester facility set up, all the extra gas that we generate in the winter, we use actually to heat our buildings and the digesters. So we reuse that. We have done studies in the past to try to see whether we should use it for other purposes, such as putting it into the gas grid, same way as solid waste looked at it. However, when we look at the capital required and the scrubbing technologies, we can offset our own expenditures and use the gas ourselves. So that's what we typically do with the digester gas. Now we will look at it in future as we upgrade technologies, but we'll make sure we'll utilize as much gas as possible. At Highland Creek, we have a small digester complex. In fact, in the capital budget, if you look, there's significant upgrades going on at that plant in the digesters. We also use that gas within the plant to offset costs. There is a large project going on to replace the old incineration units there with brand new technologies, and as part of that assessment, we're looking at whether we can do some heat recovery off of those units as well. So we always try to do an integrated system where we can to offset our own operating costs first, because it's cheaper, and if we can then send some for a revenue source, we'll look at that as well.
And how does that work with Toronto Hydro if you are able to get to a point where you're generating surplus energy? Is it possible to put that on the grid?
So through you, Mr. Chair, yes. Usually it requires us to sign an agreement with Toronto Hydro where we have, for example, the Humber plant, we do have an agreement with Toronto Hydro of how we wheel that back up into the grid, and we had to make investments on the metering component of it. We do have some other installations. They're small in scale. For example, at the Horgan water treatment plant, we have a photovoltaic setup where we're generating electricity from that. We also have natural gas backup units at that plant, which we can run and offset our peak demand. Again, we try to work closely with Toronto Hydro to curtail our electricity use first, because we're one of the largest electricity users in the city. So anything we can do to offshed load, or when they have a peaking demand situation, we will use our own equipment first to take the pressure off Toronto Hydro. We do get compensated for some of that. We also get savings on the global adjustment factor if we work jointly with them, and we've been able to reduce some of our hydro bills over the years by implementing those technologies.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. First, on stormwater management costs, we had a busy year with like within the realm of stormwater management. Do we have any idea how much that would have increased this year, or what fluctuation may have happened with the management of stormwater this year?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if you're talking about the increase in fee or revenue?
No, in volume.
Oh, in volume. With respect to volume, no, we have not done a calculation yet to see year over year. But when we do look back over time, say the last 10 years. What we're seeing is that there hasn't been a significant increase in annual rainfall events. What's been happening is
severe incidents.
It's severe incidents. It's one or two storms with very significant rainfall events, so high intensity, short duration, and isolated within parts of the city that completely overwhelm the stormwater system. And you're seeing this right across North America. Many urban areas are experiencing the same effect. So it's not more rain over the year. It is a lot of rain in a very short period of time that fills everything up very quickly.
So have you done a calculation as to what the cost difference is, maybe in the impact on our infrastructure, the damage that it's done to some of your infrastructure, as well as the cost to manage and clean up the damage?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we have looked at previous events and we've reported it to council on the cost of cleanup. Some storms, the costs are tens of millions of dollars for repairs on infrastructure. What we've been looking at is what is the cost and what level of treatment should we provide for storm retention. Right now, council's policy is probably one of the most aggressive for an urban area, where we can take storm level protection up to a 100-year storm event. If we were to drape that right across the city, we wouldn't be generating enough funds to construct that kind of infrastructure. So therefore, that's why we have it targeted as we're doing our basement flooding EAs and try to put it first in those chronic flooding areas.
Can we talk about industrial water surcharge rates? What is the amount of money that, if we were currently charging for all the parameters released by a company that we have an industrial water surcharge rate with, how much revenue would that bring in?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our calculations right now with the agreements we have in place, it would generate about an extra $1.2 million in additional revenue. And that would be spread out over about 360 industrial accounts.
Now, have the Canadian Water and Wastewater Association changed their position about full cost accounting as to something like this? Have you changed your position about the appropriateness of this? Has our Auditor General issued a report that said, oh, notwithstanding our earlier recommendation to implement full cost recovery on a program like this, you shouldn't. Let's just let these companies not pay the full cost of the pollution they put into our system.
Through Mr. Chair, as I've answered in previous years, my role is to provide you the costs of the program on a full cost recovery basis, which we did. And then it's up to council to decide whether it wants to charge the user fee at the full cost recovery rate, or whether for other policy reasons it wants to modify it. As it did so in this case, it did modify it. But we do annually look at the full cost recovery, and we will report back periodically on what is the full cost to treat.
So remind me though, because you authored a report a couple years ago that said you should implement this. Why did you bring that report forward?
Through you, Mr. Chair, when we brought that report forward, we had not looked at the industrial waste surcharge agreement fee structure, how we were charging, how we were calculating the cost for treatment for many years since prior to amalgamation. So this was the first time that we did a full detailed review, and we did a best management practices review right across North America. So based on what we found out in the market, we had recommended that to the city.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, can you just remind me what would trigger an extreme weather event for Toronto Water versus just a significant rainfall?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what we find is what I call an extreme weather event. Would be a storm event that would be approaching over a 50 to 60 year event. If it was short duration, but it dropped that much rainfall, you can overwhelm a small part of the city. We've seen that before. Typically, it would be a storm event that exceeds a 1 in 100 year storm event. That's when we see widespread with multiple homes, if not hundreds of homes, flooding.
And with respect to the water infrastructure, there's some parts of the city that are more vulnerable to these 1 in 100 year floods or rainfalls, these extreme events?
That's correct. We've been keeping a record for many years of homes that have had flooding and areas where we see quick and high-rising ponding. And so there are parts of the city, especially low-lying areas, communities that were built in little dips and valleys. We wouldn't use those standards today. They were built that way, many generations ago. And so what we have is those areas identified, and those are the areas that we've already studied or we're in the process of studying. We have got over 32 of our basement flooding study environmental assessments completed. We have a total of 67 to do.
So we'll talk about extreme weather in a second, but we also have challenges with our infrastructure that's just because it's aging, like burst pipes and water mains, not because of extreme weather, just because they're old. Is that?
Through Mr. Chair, that's correct. We have the mix going on. We have the situation where we're catching up on some of the backlog. If you read our documentation on the existing backlog, the area where we have the largest backlog is in the underground infrastructure. And so when you're dealing with that fact, you will have collapses that occur on sewers or water mains bursting. On top of that, we're trying to improve the service level. And that's what the basement flooding program is. If we're going to replace it, let's put in place something that was better than the old standard or a higher standard to hold more stormwater.
So you do note, though, that we are having more of this extreme weather, and this is, and we've identified it as a challenge, of course. We've also seen, like very recently, how this manifests in places like 260 Wellesley, frozen pipes bursting. What lessons learned would you say that we have from Toronto Water? And what are we doing to address and anticipate these sort of swings that seem to be coming at us?
So the lessons that we've learned as an operator that could translate to many organizations is you need to kind of prepare for those contingencies, make sure that you debrief after these events, you put in place some additional resources. So in the event that occurs again, everybody's trained, you know where the resources are, you can mobilize much more quickly. That's what we found is you got to be much more agile and adaptable as an organization because you know it's going to hit again, you just don't know when or where. So those are the things that we've done in Toronto Water as we assessed all of the emergencies from ice storms to frozen water services to flooding events. We've built various operating strategies to try to manage through the event and then how to recover through that period as well, managing that with our customers.
And what's our approach to coordinating emergency responses across divisions with respect to Toronto Water and the other agencies that you're working with?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we work very closely with the Office of Emergency Management. We do multiple drills with them, some specifically to run our own scenarios as we have requirements under the Safe Drinking Water Act to test our emergency plan, but we'll work with them. We also will coordinate with other divisions. We work with, for example, Toronto Hydro on coordinating our infrastructure so they know where our critical infrastructure is and they can re-energize the grid in the key locations. We've got that coordination. We work with Toronto Fire whenever they have emergencies. They know where to contact in Toronto Water for us to push more water into a particular zone, for example. And then we work closely with transportation services as well as we coordinate responses out in the field to these types of events.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Seeing none, I think we are complete for the day. Thanks, staff and everybody who put all that information and work together. It was much appreciated. We're now in recess until Wednesday morning.